Chapter 1. The Diner Extraction. Kate Miller had learned, over years measured in graveyard shifts and flickering neon reflections on rain-slick pavement, that the world after midnight sorted men into two distinct shapes. Some arrived carrying loneliness like an extra coat slung over their shoulders, settling onto cracked vinyl stools to cradle cups of coffee that long ago stopped being about caffeine and started being about warmth, about the steady hum of voices and dishes and rain against the windows that softened the edges of whatever waited for them in darkened houses and silent rooms. Others came in wrapped in the heavy scent of liquor and late-night bravado, their laughter too loud, their eyes too bold, their hands straying with the careless confidence of men who mistook politeness for permission. Tonight, the second kind filled the room. The ache in her feet pulsed upward through her calves in a slow, stubborn throb, born of long hours on tile worn smooth by decades of footsteps, and the fragile patience she'd nursed through the shift frayed thinner each time the man in booth 6 let that saccharine word sweetheart slide from his mouth as though it were a gift instead of a claim. The bell above the diner door rang again, a bright metallic chime swallowed by the low murmur of conversation and the hiss of the griddle, and Kate kept her eyes on the plate in front of her, letting routine guide her hands through the final motions of the order. Another customer, another refill, another practiced smile she could summon without feeling. "Order up, Kate." She sent the plate gliding across the counter, wiped her palms against the soft, threadbare cotton of her apron, and finally lifted her gaze toward the entrance. The room stilled. Not the gentle quiet that settled in during the slow hours before dawn, but a collective, instinctive pause that rippled through every body present. A silent intake of breath that arrived before thought, before reason, before anyone could explain why the air itself seemed to shift. 3 men stood just inside the doorway, framed by the night and the silver spill of rainlight behind them. They wore black suits cut with razor precision, the fabric catching the overhead fluorescence in sleek, controlled lines that belonged to glass towers and marble floors, rather than a roadside diner in a town that measured time by seasons instead of headlines. Their shoes shone like dark mirrors, their watches flashed with quiet, expensive gravity, and every detail of them spoke of a world built from power and polish, and private roads far removed from chipped mugs and laminated menus. Yet the clothes barely registered beside the way they held themselves. The man in the center carried his height with effortless command, broad shoulders nearly grazing the doorframe, his posture a study in contained force, as though gravity bent itself subtly around him. Dark hair lay neatly trimmed at the nape of his neck, his jaw carved in clean, decisive angles, and his eyes fixed on her with a depth of focus that pulled the room slightly off its axis. At his left stood a broader figure whose easy, knowing half-smile curled at the edge of his mouth, a man who moved through the world expecting doors to open before he reached them and conversations to end the moment he tired of them. At his right, a leaner silhouette watched with quiet intensity, his expression thoughtful, observant. Every line of him held taut with coiled readiness that suggested speed and precision beneath stillness. They felt unreal in the soft yellow light of the diner, like predators stepping soundlessly into a yard full of strays. The man in the center moved. He crossed the floor with measured strides that neither hurried nor hesitated, each step guided by absolute certainty, and Kate suddenly felt the small details of herself rise into sharp awareness: the faint coffee stain at her cuff, the loose curl slipping free at the back of her neck, the scuffed plastic name tag that still read Kate in fading ink. He stopped at the counter, close enough for the clean, expensive scent of him to mingle with the lingering traces of rain and cold night air. "Kate Miller," he said, her name shaped in a low, steady voice that carried weight like a promise. Something deep in her stomach dropped through empty space. "Yes," she answered, steadying her tone through sheer will. That's me. Can I get you something? His gaze lingered, not with the idle appraisal of a customer scanning a menu, but with an unflinching attention that felt as though it reached through apron and uniform and weary smile to touch the hidden, guarded places she kept locked away. I'm Maddox Blackthorne, he said. The name itself meant nothing, yet the way the man in booth 6 froze mid-sip sent a quiet ripple across the room. I'm here, Maddox continued, his eyes never leaving hers, to take you home. A startled laugh hovered at the edge of her throat, yet what emerged instead was calm and controlled. I think you've got the wrong person. Behind him, the broad-shouldered man let out a soft, amused breath. No, he said, grin sharpening. We really don't. Kate took a step back, space opening between them, her heartbeat quickening into a steady drumbeat beneath her ribs. Look, if this is some kind of joke. Your name is Katerina Blackthorne, Maddox said, his voice quiet and unwavering. She met his eyes head-on. My name is Kate Miller. That's the name your mother chose later, he replied with gentle certainty. On your birth certificate, in the hospital records, and in my father's will, you are Katerina Blackthorne, born in Cedar Ridge Hospital 26 years ago. Mother, Anna Miller. Father. A brief shadow crossed his expression. Lucian Blackthorne. The floor beneath her seemed to tilt, reality sliding half an inch sideways. How do you know that? Because, he said, and regret flickered through his gaze like distant lightning. Your life's about to change in ways you're not going to like. Silence stretched taut between them while the diner pretended at normalcy, forks clinking too loudly against plates, coffee mugs settling too carefully onto saucers. Kate folded her arms, grounding herself in the simple pressure of her own touch. If this is about money or some kind of scam, it's about inheritance, the younger man said, his voice smooth and precise. A disbelieving laugh escaped her, bright and brittle. You've got the wrong waitress. Maddox held her gaze. Your father died 3 days ago. The word father landed heavy and unfamiliar, like a bruise pressed into skin she didn't remember wounding. I don't have a father. You did, he said softly, and he was the most powerful man in our world. The word hour sent a fine prickle across her skin. The diner door opened once more, admitting a rush of cold air and distant thunder, and through the glass she saw 3 black cars idling at the curb, engines murmuring with quiet, restrained power behind darkened windows. Maddox extended his hand. The gesture carried no force, no demand, only an unspoken authority that shaped the moment around it. Invitation and inevitability entwined. Come with us, Kate Miller, he said. We'll explain who you really are. Her gaze fell to his hand. Long fingers, a pale scar crossing the knuckles, strength etched into every line. I have a shift, she murmured, clinging to the last familiar anchor she could name. A soft snort sounded behind him, and the faintest hint of fondness touched the younger man's mouth. Maddox's eyes warmed, something tender threading through the steel. You don't anymore. She should have said no. She should have called the police. She should have run. Instead, she found herself reaching for her coat. Chapter 2. The Blackthorne Estate. The car swept through the gates in one seamless motion, the wrought iron parting with silent obedience as the tires rolled from fractured public asphalt onto a ribbon of private stone, so smooth it felt as though the world itself had been freshly paved in her honor. On either side, ranks of tall trees stood in disciplined formation, their dark trunks rising like pillars, and their branches arching overhead to weave a vaulted canopy that turned the night road into a shadowed cathedral of leaves and rainlight. Kate folded her hands in her lap, fingers lacing and unlacing in restless rhythm, and let her gaze drift to the window as the last familiar glow of the city dissolved behind them, replaced by deep velvet darkness punctuated by scattered lanterns that traced the road's elegant curves like fallen stars caught at ground level. The low hum of the engine filled the cabin, steady and powerful, while rain whispered across the glass in silver threads that blurred the outside world into soft motion. Across from her, Maddox occupied the seat with the contained ease of a man who never surrendered awareness. One arm stretched along the backrest, broad shoulders relaxed, yet coiled with quiet readiness, his profile cut cleanly against the passing lights. His eyes angled toward the window, yet a subtle, constant attention seemed to rest on her all the same, an unseen current that brushed her skin whenever she breathed. Knox had twisted in his seat to face her fully, long legs sprawled with careless grace, hands folded behind his head, as though this midnight upheaval were merely an entertaining detour. "So," he said lightly, voice warm with amusement, "how's your night going?" Kate stared at him, incredulity sharpening her tone into dry wit. "3 strangers announced my dead father, kidnapped me into a luxury car, and erased my shift schedule in under 10 minutes. I'd call that a busy evening." Julian's shoulders shook with a muted laugh he tried to hide behind his hand, while Knox grinned openly. "Fair enough." Maddox shot Knox a single look, dark eyes carrying quiet command that needed no words. Knox's grin only widened, irreverent and unbothered. Kate leaned back into the supple leather, exhaling slowly as the road stretched onward beneath them. "You still haven't explained what kind of inheritance requires an armed escort and a private forest." "Because the explanation spans centuries," Julian said gently, his voice smooth as polished wood. "And attracts enemies," Knox added with cheerful bluntness. Maddox's jaw flexed. Unnecessary commentary. Her gaze moved between them, tension and curiosity tangling together. "So, this is the part where you tell me I'm secretly rich." "Yes," Knox said brightly, "and influential, and about to become extremely inconvenient to a lot of very dangerous people." A humorless breath escaped her. "You're enjoying this far too much." "Occupational hazard?" he replied. The road curved one final time and the trees fell away. Her breath vanished. The estate rose from the hillside in luminous grandeur, an expanse of stone and glass and layered light that claimed the landscape with effortless authority. Terraced gardens stepped upward in geometric harmony, their hedges and pathways sculpted with mathematical precision, while a long reflecting pool stretched beside the drive, rain dimpling its surface into rippling constellations. Vast windows blazed with warm golden glow, revealing the sweeping silhouettes of staircases and chandeliers and halls large enough to echo with history. The car slowed to a stately glide. Kate leaned forward, drawn toward the glass as though proximity alone might prove the vision real. "Oh," she breathed. Knox smirked, satisfaction threading his tone. "Welcome to Blackthorn Manor." The final gates opened without a sound, and the vehicle climbed the winding ascent toward the grand entrance, where a line of staff waited beneath the stone overhang, umbrellas held high in perfect unison, posture immaculate beneath the falling rain. Kate's stomach flipped. "They're waiting for me?" "For us," Maddox said softly, then, after a heartbeat, "But yes." The car came to rest. Maddox stepped out into the rain and circled to her door with unhurried certainty, opening it as cool night air rushed in scented with wet stone and distant thunder. Kate hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his, warmth meeting strength as his fingers closed around hers with steady assurance. He guided her down, his focus intent on her footing until her shoes found solid ground beneath the sheltering arch. The staff bowed as one seamless motion. "Sir Blackthorn," the man at the front said, awe edging his voice, We didn't expect you so soon. We arrived ahead of schedule, Maddox replied with a measured incline of his head. The man's gaze shifted to Kate, and something profound passed across his face. Recognition bloomed into shock, shock softened into reverence. Kate felt every eye settle on her like a tangible weight. Why is everyone looking at me like that? Maddox's answer came in movement rather than words, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back as he guided her forward through the parted line of staff and into the heart of the estate. Warmth embraced them inside, rich with the scent of polished wood and delicate florals, and the entry hall soared upward 3 stories high beneath a cascading crystal chandelier that scattered prismatic light across marble floors veined like frozen lightning. Towering columns framed the space, their shadows stretching long and elegant along the walls. Kate halted just past the threshold, wonder loosening her breath. This place is enormous. Julian hovered nearby, presence gentle and unobtrusive. You're handling this with remarkable composure. I'm waiting for the dream to fade, she murmured. Footsteps approached from a side corridor, measured and swift. An older woman emerged into the hall, tall and poised, silver hair drawn into a sleek knot that caught the chandelier's light. Relief softened her features at the sight of Maddox. Thank God, she whispered, then turned to Kate. Emotion broke through her composure in a single heartbeat, eyes bright with tears she mastered with graceful restraint. She inclined her head, voice trembling with formal warmth. My dear, welcome home. Kate's spine straightened. There's been some confusion. The woman smiled through shining eyes. There's perfect clarity, miss. Or rather, she looked to Maddox. He gave one decisive nod. Her gaze returned to Kate, reverence woven through every syllable. Lady Blackthorne. The title struck the marble like a dropped glass. Kate blinked. I'm sorry, what? Maddox stepped closer, solid as a wall at her side. That is your family name. She shook her head, breath shallow. My name is Kate Miller. For the moment, Knox said softly behind her. She spun toward him. This isn't funny. I know, he said quietly. Maddox met her eyes. Your father was Lucian Blackthorne, and everything here bore his name. Silence deepened, heavy and resonant. Kate turned slowly, taking in marble and gold and waiting faces, and fear unfurled at last inside her chest. That can't be true. A daughter would have known. He kept you hidden, Maddox said, voice low and certain. Why? A man hurried in from the side hall clutching a sheaf of papers, urgency propelling him forward until he saw her. Color drained from his face. She carries his likeness. Kate's pulse stumbled. Like who? He straightened at once. Forgive me, I'm the estate solicitor. We prepared the formal reading of the will. Maddox's expression hardened into command. Now. The counsel can wait. The solicitor bowed. Yes, sir. They entered a sitting room lit by low firelight and warm lamps, deep leather chairs arranged around a long table already set with neatly ordered documents. Kate lowered herself into a seat with careful slowness, the world still swaying beneath her feet. Maddox sat across from her. Knox leaned against the mantel, arms folded. Julian settled beside her, presence steady and reassuring. The solicitor cleared his throat. Lucian Blackthorne left explicit instructions. The estate remained in trust pending identification of his biological heir. That heir is you, Katerina Blackthorne. The name struck like a distant echo. Full control of all Blackthorne holdings transfers to you upon verification of lineage. Knox let out a low whistle. Kate's voice came small but steady. You're saying this entire estate belongs to me? Yes. A tightness gripped her chest. I don't want it. The room fell utterly still. Maddox studied her, silence deep as the fire's glow. Then he spoke with gentle finality. You don't have a choice. Her eyes flashed. Excuse me? There are conditions, the solicitor interjected quickly. Traditional requirements. A brittle laugh escaped her. Of course there are. To assume formal leadership of the estate, he continued, adjusting his glasses, you must be married. The word rang sharp and undeniable. Married, she repeated. Yes. To whom? The solicitor hesitated. Maddox's gaze never wavered. One of us. Silence stretched wide. Kate looked from Maddox to Knox to Julian, three commanding figures bound to her fate in a single impossible decree. You're joking, she whispered. Knox's smile faded. Julian's expression turned grave. Maddox stood immovable. Kate rose to her feet, resolve surging through the shock. No, absolutely not. Maddox stood as well, towering yet calm. Sit down, Kate. No. He remained still, voice quiet and unyielding. This is not a negotiation. Her hands trembled, anger igniting bright in her eyes. You don't get to decide who I marry. I can tell you, he said evenly, what follows if you refuse. She met his gaze, defiant fire meeting iron certainty. And what follows? His expression darkened with grave truth. You lose everything. Chapter 3. The Contract. Silence settled over the room like heavy velvet after Maddox's final words fell, thick and suffocating, wrapping itself around marble columns and polished wood until even the fire seemed to burn more quietly in the hearth. Kate remained standing where shock had lifted her to her feet, her fingers curled tight at her sides, her gaze fixed on the three men before her as if they'd calmly rewritten the laws of the world and expected her to nod in agreement. You lose everything. The phrase pulsed through her mind with relentless clarity, each repetition louder than the last, echoing against the walls of her thoughts until it drowned out the crackle of flame and the whisper of turning paper. That's blackmail, she said at last, her voice taut with disbelief sharpened into accusation. Knox's answering smile carried easy confidence, the corner of his mouth lifting with infuriating calm. That's inheritance law. She spun toward him, anger flaring bright enough to warm the cold knot in her chest. You're enjoying this far too much. Occupational hazard, he replied, unrepentant and entirely sincere. Julian stepped closer, concern softening the lines of his face as he spoke her name with gentle care. Kate, Katerina, this protects the estate. That protection extends to you. I don't care about the estate, she fired back, the words breaking free on a ragged breath. An hour ago I didn't know it existed. I didn't ask for any of this. The solicitor folded his hands atop the open folder, his tone measured and formal. Lady Blackthorne, the estate stands as an entity independent of your wishes. The trust exists to prevent hostile seizure. Hostile seizure, she repeated faintly, the syllables tasting strange on her tongue. Of me. Of the holdings, he amended swiftly. You function as the legal conduit of control. A brittle laugh slipped from her lips, sharp as cracked glass. So I'm a mechanism, a living key. Maddox's jaw tightened, tension flickering beneath the composed stillness of his expression. You're his daughter, he said quietly. And you're the heir. She met his eyes, truly met them, and something deep within her twisted under the weight of that unwavering certainty. You knew, she said softly. You walked into that diner already knowing exactly what you were doing. Yes. And you still told me I had no choice. His gaze held steady, dark and immovable. Because you don't. The fury she expected never fully rose. Instead, exhaustion washed through her, heavy and sudden, as if the ground beneath her life had shifted too far and too fast for anger to keep its footing. She sank into the chair behind her, the leather cool against her spine, the room spinning slowly back into focus as she drew a steadying breath. "Explain it," she said, slowly, in language that doesn't make me want to throw something priceless through that window. The solicitor inclined his head and opened the waiting documents, the soft rasp of paper loud in the hush. Lucian Blackthorne placed his assets into a protective trust 26 years ago, he began. That trust names his biological heir as sole inheritor, verified by bloodline and confirmed through marriage to a recognized alpha. Kate blinked once, then again, each blink slower than the last. "Recognized alpha?" she repeated. Knox's grin flashed bright. "We've arrived at the interesting part." Maddox's glance cut toward him like drawn steel. The solicitor pressed on, unflinching. "The Blackthorne estate serves as both financial stronghold and governing seat of the Northern Pact territories. Tradition and law bind leadership to a mated pair." The word pack drifted through the air and settled with eerie weight. Kate's voice softened into wary disbelief. "Pack, as in wolves." Silence answered first. Then Maddox lifted his eyes to hers, and something ancient stirred behind that dark gaze, a fleeting brilliance that flashed gold and feral for the span of a heartbeat before settling once more into human shape. Across the room, Knox's eyes caught the firelight with the same untamed glimmer, and Julian's followed in echo, 3 sparks of wild power briefly visible beneath carefully worn skin. The room steadied again, yet the world no longer held its previous shape. "Yes," Maddox said simply. Her laughter broke free, breathless and incredulous. Of course you're werewolves. That fits perfectly into my evening." Knox bowed with theatrical flourish. "At your service." Julian rubbed a hand across the back of his neck, wincing at the spectacle. Maddox closed his eyes for the briefest moment, then met her gaze once more. "We planned a gentler reveal." "I was negotiating extra fries an hour ago," she murmured weakly. "Now I'm inheriting a supernatural kingdom." "And ascending a ruling bloodline," Knox added lightly. "Life moves fast." She pressed her palms against her eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the surreal tide settle just enough to grasp one solid thread. "The marriage," she said, lowering her hands. "Why one of you?" "Lucian adopted 3 heirs to steward the estate in your absence," the solicitor explained, "each raised as successor until his daughter's return. The will binds governance continuity to marriage between the biological heir and one adopted son." Kate lifted her gaze to the 3 men before her. Maddox stood carved from stillness and restraint. Knox leaned easily against the mantel, eyes sharp and assessing. Julian watched with open concern, his hands loosely clasped as though ready to steady her if she swayed. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that I must marry one of 3 strangers I met tonight, or surrender a legacy I never knew existed." "Yes," the solicitor confirmed. Her attention dropped to the papers spread before her, the neat black ink waiting like an unblinking witness to her future. "What happens if I walk out that door?" she asked quietly, "and never come back?" Maddox answered without hesitation. "The trust dissolves. Control passes to the council. Your claim ends." "And me? You become a liability?" The word struck deep and cold. Knox's expression hardened. Julian drew a sharp breath. Maddox held the truth steady between them. "Others will come for what your father built," he said softly. "Some will come for you." A chill traced her spine. "So this is protection?" "Yes." "By binding me to the family that already owns everything." He met her eyes, unwavering. "By placing you beyond anyone's reach." A faint, incredulous laugh escaped her. You describe marriage like armor. Knox's gaze darkened with absolute conviction. It is. Julian nodded once, solemn. Completely. The solicitor slid a final document toward her. An engagement must be declared within 48 hours. Until then, all of you remain here under guard. 48 hours, 3 men. One impossible choice. She lifted her head slowly. I choose which one. A beat of silence stretched. Yes, the solicitor said carefully. The will grants you that choice. Relief surged through her in a dizzying rush. Choice anchored the storm, small yet powerful enough to steady her breath. She pushed the papers aside. Nothing gets signed tonight. Julian answered at once. You deserve rest first. Maddox inclined his head. You'll have time. Where do I sleep? She asked, fatigue finally claiming her shoulders. The guest wing, Julian began. The East Suite, Maddox interjected, voice firm with quiet authority. Knox lifted a brow, direct and decisive. It's secure, Maddox replied. And conveniently close to your rooms, Knox added with a knowing glance. Kate's eyes narrowed. You're debating my bedroom. Your safety, Maddox corrected calmly. She rose, resolve gathering around her like a cloak. I need a shower. And locks. Several. Julian smiled softly. You'll have every one of them. She hesitated at the doorway, gaze settling once more on Maddox. What happens now? He held her eyes, the firelight casting bronze shadows across the sharp planes of his face. Now you rest. And tomorrow? His answer came low and certain. Tomorrow we begin convincing you to marry one of us. Her stomach fluttered at the promise contained within those words. Knox's grin returned, wicked and bright. Julian flushed pink at the tips of his ears. Maddox remained solemn, watchful, unyielding. Kate turned and followed the waiting staff into the long lamplit corridor, footsteps fading into the hush of the estate as 3 princes stood in the glow of the fire, eyes tracking the woman who had just stepped into power, vast enough to reshape every board on which they all now stood. Chapter 4. The East Suite. The corridor that carried Kate away from the sitting room unfolded in a long, gleaming ribbon of stone and light, stretching so far ahead that distance itself seemed to bend beneath the quiet authority of the estate. Polished floors reflected the warm gold of recessed sconces, each footstep sending a soft echo ahead of her, like a question the walls had heard for centuries and never bothered to answer. Every doorway they passed stood framed in carved wood and subtle ornamentation, every rug beneath her feet thick enough to swallow sound. Every painting arranged with the effortless assurance of wealth that had grown so accustomed to itself it no longer sought admiration. This place rose around her like a monument to permanence. She folded her arms across her chest, fingers brushing the worn fabric of her diner sweater, the apron draped over her wrist like a relic from a life already drifting out of reach, and a keen awareness of contrast pressed against her skin. Denim and grease-stained cotton moved through marble and crystal and gold, and each step felt like a footfall across the seam between 2 separate worlds. Julian walked beside her, his stride measured to match hers, presence steady and unintrusive, close enough to reassure yet distant enough to grant her space. Up close, the details of him resolved into something quietly striking. A charcoal suit cut with graceful precision along a lean, enduring frame, dark hair brushing his collar in soft, unstudied waves, and eyes that held warmth where his brother's gazes carried steel and flame. He looked kind in a way that settled the air around him. You don't have to say anything, he offered softly, his voice a low thread woven through the hush. I know, she answered, the words slipping out on a tired breath. They walked on beneath vaulted ceilings and past tall windows where moonlight pooled against the glass, silence stretching between them until her thoughts pressed too hard to remain unspoken. "Did you grow up here?" she asked. He inclined his head. "For most of my life." Her gaze slid toward him. "Did you know about me?" A brief pause softened his expression. "We knew there was a daughter. We searched for a shadow without a face." "And Maddox?" "Only recently," Julian said gently. The answer eased a small, tight place inside her chest, a knot loosening with quiet relief. The east wing opened before them, guarded by two men whose posture sharpened the moment Julian appeared. Their attention shifted to Kate with startled recognition that rippled through the air like a silent alarm. Julian spoke with calm authority. "She's with me." They stepped aside at once. The door at the corridor's end swung inward, revealing a suite vast enough to halt her in the threshold, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and wonder. A sitting room welcomed her first, elegant in restrained tones of pale stone and warm wood, a fireplace set flush into the wall where amber flames danced beneath a carved mantel. Beyond, through a wide arch, the bedroom stretched into view, crowned by a bed so expansive it seemed carved for royalty rather than rest. "This is overwhelming," she murmured. Julian's faint smile carried reassurance. "It's secure. It's yours for now." "For now," she echoed, the phrase settling softly against the hush. He gestured toward a side door. "The bath is through there. A dressing room sits beyond it. Press the call button by the bed if you need anything at all." She nodded, eyes wandering across velvet drapes, soft lamplight, and the steady glow of embers in the hearth. "And the locks?" she asked, a fragile thread of humor returning. His face brightened. "5 on this door alone." A small, weary smile touched her lips. "Thank you." He lingered for a heartbeat, words catching gently on the edge of his breath. "You're meeting this moment with remarkable strength." She studied her hands, pale against the robe of her sleeve. "Strength comes later. Right now I'm still catching up." Understanding softened his gaze. Julian inclined his head and withdrew, the door closing behind him with a muted final click. Silence gathered instantly, deep and complete. Kate stood in the center of the suite, listening to the distant whisper of ventilation and the steady crackle of firelight, the stillness of a place built for control and order and uninterrupted sleep. The quiet pressed close around her, vast and unfamiliar, and the weight of the evening finally settled into her bones. Her knees folded beneath her. She sank onto the edge of the bed, palms pressed to her face, breath moving too quickly through lungs still chasing reality. An hour ago, she'd counted tips beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, weighed groceries against laundry, and measured life in shifts and receipts. Now an empire rested in her name, and a marriage waited in her future. She rose with sudden urgency and crossed into the bathroom, turning the shower on before thought could catch up. Steam unfurled in white clouds, curling across marble and glass, softening every edge into something gentle enough to endure. She stepped beneath the cascade, heat flowing over her skin in long, soothing rivers that anchored her to the present moment. Katarina Blackthorne. The name drifted through her mind like an unfamiliar melody, rich and resonant yet distant, a mantle laid across her shoulders by unseen hands. Water traced the lines of her face and slid through her hair as she breathed deeply, letting warmth seep into places fear had frozen. When she emerged wrapped in a plush white robe, softness embracing her from collar to hem, a folded stack of clothing waited on the bed. Leggings, a sweater, slippers arranged with quiet care. Someone had thought of comfort before she could ask for it. She dressed slowly, each soft layer easing the sharpness of the night, and wandered to the tall window where moonlight bathed the grounds below. Gardens and pathways stretched outward in deliberate patterns, lanterns casting pools of light along the perimeter where security moved in patient intervals. Beauty spread before her in careful symmetry, and the walls that held it all rose just as high. Across the manor, deep within a study paneled in dark wood and lined with worn leather tomes, three men stood around a low table lit by the last glow of a dwindling fire. Shadows leaned long across the floorboards, flickering with every shifting ember. Maddox occupied the space near the window like a pillar carved from midnight, black suit drawn sharp across broad shoulders, dark hair swept back from a face honed to decisive angles. Stillness wrapped around him with the tension of a drawn bowstring, discipline shaped into living form. Knox leaned against the mantel, jacket open and tie loosened with deliberate ease, his powerful frame relaxed yet alert, eyes tracking every movement in the room with predatory awareness beneath an easy smile. Julian stood between them, hands loosely clasped, lighter suit and softer expression, lending balance to the charged air, quiet strength held beneath calm restraint. Silence stretched until Knox broke it with a low chuckle. Well, that went smoother than expected. No shattered antiques. I'll take that victory. Julian's gaze sharpened. She's in shock. She's inheriting power, Knox countered. That carries weight. Maddox hadn't moved since the door closed behind Kate. His gaze rested beyond the glass, seeing something far deeper than the moonlit gardens below. She's afraid, Julian said softly. Maddox knew the truth of it. He'd seen that hollow disbelief in her eyes, the moment where certainty gave way to vertigo. She thinks she stands exposed, Julian continued. You place that burden on her shoulders. Maddox's eyes closed briefly. It's reality. It's brutal, Julian murmured. It's necessary. Knox tilted his head, watching him with thoughtful intensity. You sound like our father. The words landed with weight. She deserves choice, Julian insisted. She's flesh and breath and heart. I know. Knox's voice softened. Do you? Maddox turned, gaze cold and unwavering. Say what you're implying. Knox's grin faded into solemn understanding. You've already made your decision. Julian's eyes flicked between them. What decision? Knox answered quietly. He intends to marry her. Maddox held their gaze without denial. Julian drew a sharp breath. Maddox. She needs protection, Maddox said with unshakable certainty. The council moves swiftly. Rival packs already know the heir stands revealed. And you believe only you can shield her? Yes. Knox studied him, then spoke with measured insight. Or you believe only you can stand beside her? Maddox said nothing. Julian exhaled slowly. This moment shapes more than law. It shapes war, Maddox replied. Knox's faint smile returned, edged with anticipation. Finally, familiar ground. Footsteps passed faintly in the hall beyond, the sound a distant reminder of the living heart of the estate. Maddox turned back to the window, gaze lifting toward the darkened floors above where Kate settled into a bed that carried her name yet felt borrowed by fate. Morning would bring the first calls. By week's end, her name would blaze across every screen that mattered, and the world would learn that Katerina Blackthorne had returned to claim her place. Chapter 5. The Morning After. Kate woke into a hush so refined it felt curated, a silence layered in velvet and glass, pressed gently against her ears like a careful hand asking the world to wait. No distant traffic threaded through the walls, no pipes knocked their restless rhythm through the bones of the building. Instead, the air lay smooth and undisturbed, as though the manor itself understood the value of stillness and practiced it with reverence. She lay motionless beneath sheets cool as river water and soft as breath, her eyes fixed on a ceiling painted in pale relief and intricate molding, the kind of craftsmanship that belonged to galleries and cathedrals rather than anywhere someone simply slept. For a few suspended seconds, her mind drifted in that gentle blank space between dreams and memory, where reality holds its shape loosely and nothing yet demands to be believed. Then remembrance returned in a single, rushing tide. The diner, the men in black suits, the names spoken aloud, the will, the contract. Wolves. Her stomach plunged as if the bed had tilted beneath her. She surged upright, the white robe tangling around her legs, pulse hammering loud and insistent in her ears as the word pulsed again through her thoughts with impossible clarity. Wolves. 3 impossibly wealthy princes had stood in firelight and informed her, with calm voices and legal language, that they ruled over a pack of werewolves, and the memory rose vivid and undeniable, as sharp as the chill that raced along her spine. Her hand lifted to her face, fingers pressing against her brow as a thin breath slipped between her lips. Of course they were. She drew in the room again with fresh, startled awareness. The east suite stretched wide and luminous around her, morning sunlight pouring through tall windows in softened streams where the curtains had been drawn halfway back, as though someone had anticipated the weight of waking and chosen gentleness over glare. Furniture rested in elegant stillness, polished wood and fine fabric untouched by wear, every surface carrying the quiet assurance of permanence. Magnificent, overwhelming, waiting. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and rose, bare feet meeting plush carpet that yielded softly beneath her weight. Across the room, a tall mirror held her reflection in patient clarity. The same pale hair tumbled over her shoulders. The same familiar face looked back at her. The same woman who had poured coffee beneath buzzing lights yesterday morning. Yet awareness shimmered behind her eyes now, a deeper knowing that reshaped the world around her. Kate Miller stood there. Katarina Blackthorne watched from the glass. The name lingered in the air like a borrowed melody, rich and resonant, yet still learning the rhythm of her breath. It draped across her shoulders like a mantle waiting to be claimed, heavy with legacy and expectation. She dressed slowly in the clothes left waiting for her, soft jeans sliding easily into place, a pale sweater fitting her frame with uncanny perfection, simple flats replacing her worn sneakers as though the house itself had reached quietly into her life and chosen comfort for her. A knock sounded at the door. She startled, heart leaping before reason followed. "Yes?" she called. A woman's voice answered through the wood, gentle and formal. "Breakfast is being served in the east dining room, my lady." My lady. The title settled over her like cool rain. "Thank you," she replied, voice steadier than she felt. She stepped into the corridor and walked toward whatever waited next. The east dining room opened before her in graceful proportions that transformed modest scale into quiet grandeur, a long table stretching through the center of the space beneath a chandelier that scattered sunlight across porcelain and silver. Tall windows framed the morning in bright panes of gold, and staff moved along the walls with practiced ease, their presence smooth and unobtrusive as the turn of a page. 3 men already occupied the room. Her pace slowed as she crossed the threshold, and this time, awareness sharpened into detail. Maddox stood near the window with his jacket set aside, sleeves rolled neatly along his forearms, dark hair catching the light where it swept back from his face. Strength lay coiled beneath his skin, visible in the quiet tension of his posture, in the deliberate stillness that carried the promise of swift movement held carefully in check. He looked like something that guarded borders. Heat crept up her throat, and she turned her gaze away. Knox lounged in his chair with restless ease, dark hair rumpled, tie loosened, a grin already forming as his eyes found her. Energy radiated from him like sun-warmed stone, dangerous and playful in equal measure, the kind of presence that drew attention simply by existing. Julian stood at the sideboard pouring coffee, his movements unhurried and fluid, and when he saw her his expression softened instantly, warmth unfolding in his gaze, like the first light through leaves. Relief loosened something tight in her chest. "Good morning," Julian said. Knox lifted his cup in salute. "Sleeping Beauty returns." Maddox turned. All three sets of eyes settled on her at once. Attention gathered in the room like gravity finding its center, the air orienting subtly around her presence, and warmth climbed her throat beneath the weight of it. "Good morning," she managed, her voice carrying the fragile hope of normalcy. Julian crossed the room with easy grace. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little." "Then the morning's already kind." He offered her a steaming cup and guided her toward a chair with gentle courtesy. Knox rose and leaned against the table nearby, eyes tracing her form with open appreciation. "You wear royalty surprisingly well for someone who went to bed thinking she'd joined a supernatural dynasty." She groaned softly. "Please don't phrase it like that." "Wolves?" he suggested brightly. Her look silenced him more effectively than words. Maddox remained near the window until he stepped forward and came to rest just behind her chair, close enough that his presence pressed warm and steady at her back, without a single touch. Awareness of him settled into her senses with quiet certainty, like a sentinel taking position along a wall. "Did anyone disturb you?" he asked. "No." "Good." The word carried the quiet relief of vigilance fulfilled. Breakfast arrived in a graceful procession of silver and porcelain. She lifted her fork and forced herself to eat, each movement deliberate beneath the unmistakable sense of watchfulness that followed the arc of her hands and the tilt of her head. Unnerving, comforting, impossible to ignore. "So," Knox said lightly, "have you chosen your favorite wolf yet?" Julian made a soft sound of protest. Kate nearly inhaled her coffee. Maddox's voice cut cleanly through the air. "Enough." She drew a steady breath. "Can we leave that conversation for another day?" Julian nodded at once. "Of course." Knox lifted his hands in surrender. "Spoil sport." She set her fork down. "What happens now?" Maddox answered without hesitation. "Security tightens. The council will request an audience soon." "And the wolves?" she asked, only half joking. "All accounted for," Knox replied cheerfully. She rubbed her temples as the reality of it all settled once more around her shoulders. When they rose from the table, Maddox fell into step beside her, his stride matching hers in silent accord. He walked without touching, without claiming, yet his presence shaped the space around them with protective intent, like a wall built from shadow and will. And Kate, despite every instinct to resist the feeling, recognized the calm that bloomed in her chest beneath that steady guard, the quiet assurance that wherever he stood, nothing dangerous could cross the distance between them. Chapter 6. The Heir Apparent. By the time Kate finished her second cup of coffee, she was beginning to suspect that exhaustion had become her new baseline. Sleep had come in short, fractured stretches, interrupted by the unfamiliar weight of silk sheets and the persistent awareness that she was no longer alone in a world that had once been very small. Even now, seated at a table that cost more than her car, she felt as if she were still waking up inside someone else's life. Breakfast dissolved slowly. Staff cleared plates with quiet efficiency. Sunlight crept higher along the windows. Somewhere beyond the dining room, the manor continued breathing around her, vast and watchful. And the men did not leave. Julian lingered near her chair, offering more coffee when her cup dipped below half, asking gentle questions about whether she preferred tea or fruit in the mornings, whether she had slept warmly enough, whether the robe had been comfortable. Knox sprawled back into his chair, openly enjoying the way she tried very hard not to look at him, as if the entire situation were some private entertainment he intended to stretch for as long as possible. Maddox remained where he had positioned himself behind her, close without explanation, his presence steady and unyielding, like a wall she had not known she needed until it existed. When the last plate was cleared, a man in a dark suit appeared in the doorway. He did not move like staff. His posture was too precise, his attention already fixed on Maddox as he crossed the threshold and leaned in close enough to speak quietly at his ear. Security. The word formed in her mind before anyone said it. He spoke quietly to Maddox, leaning in just far enough to murmur something she could not hear. Maddox nodded once. Then his attention returned to her. "The first calls have started," he said. Her stomach tightened. "Already?" "Yes." "How many?" Kate worried aloud. "Enough." Julian winced faintly. Knox smiled like a man who had been waiting for this moment. "Welcome to the fun part." She rubbed her palms together beneath the table. "Define fun." Maddox did not answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat, finally placing himself fully in her line of sight. Up close, the control in him was even more unsettling. He did not fidget or shift. He held still with the deliberate economy of someone who was always aware of exactly how much space he occupied. "We will release a limited statement this afternoon," he said. "Your identity will be confirmed. Your status as heir will be acknowledged. The engagement clause will not be addressed yet." "Good," she said quickly, "because I am not engaged." "Not yet," Knox said cheerfully. Maddox shot him a look. She ignored both of them. "What happens after the statement?" "The council will formally request your presence," Julian said. "They will want to assess you." "Assess me," she repeated. "Yes." "For what?" "For survivability," Knox supplied lightly. Julian sighed. "For suitability." "That is not better." Maddox leaned back slightly, folding his hands in front of him. "They will want to know whether you can hold the position." "And if they decide I can't?" "Then they will attempt to replace you." The word landed with an unpleasant finality. "Replace me with who?" she asked. "Us," Knox said without hesitation. Her breath caught. Julian looked uncomfortable. Maddox did not flinch. "The will is explicit," Maddox said. "If the biological heir proves incapable of assuming control, succession defaults to the adopted line." "And the marriage requirement?" "Yes." She stared at him. "So either I marry one of you, or you become king without me." She stared at all three of them for a long moment. "Then I don't understand something," she said slowly. They waited. "If the crown defaults to one of you, if I'm deemed unfit, if the council can replace me, then why do you need me at all?" The question settled heavily over the table. Knox's smile faded. Julian's hands tightened where they rested on the back of his chair. Maddox did not answer right away. She pressed on, because once the thought had formed, it refused to let her go. "You could have claimed the estate yourselves," she said. "You were already running it. You were already in line. You could have let me stay in my diner and never told me any of this." Silence. Not the awkward kind, the careful kind. Finally, Julian spoke. "Because without you," he said quietly, "the Blackthorn line ends." She frowned. "But you just said—" "We can rule," Knox interrupted, his voice suddenly less playful. "But we can't inherit." She looked between them. "That feels like the same thing." "It isn't," Maddox said. His voice was calm, but something in it had hardened. "The estate is not only land and money," he said. "It is identity, authority, and recognition. There are pacts that will never accept an adopted king, no matter how strong he is." "And the council?" "The council tolerates us," Knox said. They defer to the name. Julian met her eyes. You are the name. The words hit her harder than anything else had. So I'm a symbol, she said. Your legitimacy, Maddox replied. And the marriage? Is how that legitimacy survives, he said. Without a bonded heir tied to the ruling line, the pacts fracture. The council intervenes. The territory destabilizes. And you three just step in and take over the chaos. If necessary, Knox said quietly. She let out a slow breath. So you didn't bring me here because you needed a queen. All three of them were watching her now. Maddox held her gaze. We brought you here, he said, because without you, the throne becomes a battlefield. Essentially, Knox agreed. That is not reassuring. No, Julian said gently. It's not. Silence settled over the table again. Kate exhaled slowly. All right, she said. Then let's start with something simple. What exactly am I supposed to do today? Maddox's gaze softened, just slightly. You will meet the estate council. You will review the trust documents. You will be introduced to your personal security team. She blinked. I have a personal security team. Yes. How many? 6, Knox said. 8, if Maddox panics. I am not panicking, Maddox replied calmly. Knox grinned. Yet. She pushed her chair back and stood. Fine. Paperwork I can handle. Meetings I can handle. Bodyguards I will tolerate. She hesitated, then looked directly at Maddox. But I am not choosing a husband today. Something unreadable flickered behind his green eyes. Of course not, he said. The answer came too quickly. She noticed. Julian rose beside her. I'll walk you to the study. The council is waiting. Thank you. As she moved toward the door, she felt it again. That subtle adjustment in the room, Maddox rising at the same moment she did. Not beside her, not behind her, but close enough that anyone watching would understand without explanation who stood between her and the world. The realization unsettled her more than any mention of wolves had. In the hallway, Knox fell into step on her other side. You know, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. You're handling this impressively well. She glanced at him. Is that a compliment or a warning? Both. Julian walked ahead, already speaking quietly with staff, organizing her schedule with the effortless competence of someone who had been trained to manage crises. Maddox remained silent, but she could feel his attention on her as clearly as if he had placed a hand at her back. And somehow, impossibly, that made walking through a house full of wolves feel less dangerous than walking through her own life had ever been. Chapter 7. The Council and the Contract. The council chamber rose around Kate like a cathedral carved from authority itself, every line and angle designed to draw the eye upward and inward at the same time, forcing awareness of height and history and weight. The ceiling arched high above polished stone floors, its ribs supported by towering pillars etched with ancient sigils whose meaning lived somewhere deep in her bones, even as her mind struggled to name them. Markings older than borders, older than governments, older than the language she spoke. Narrow windows cut into the upper walls spilled pale daylight in slender beams that caught the gold inlays circling the long central table, turning the floor into a quiet ring of sunlight and shadow. Power gathered here like a held breath. It waited for her to step inside it. Kate crossed the threshold with measured steps and an unyielding spine, her hands relaxed at her sides, her chin level, her pace steady, each movement a deliberate answer to the silent pressure of the room. She felt the architecture lean in around her, felt centuries of decisions echoing faintly beneath her feet. Yet she carried herself forward with the stubborn grace of someone who refused to bow before walls and stone and expectation. Maddox walked beside her, He'd chosen charcoal this morning instead of midnight black, the suit cut with ruthless precision that sharpened every line of his tall, controlled frame, the fabric skimming broad shoulders and a narrow waist as if tailored for command. His presence altered the atmosphere without a single visible effort, the air itself seeming to part and settle differently around him, as though the chamber recognized something ancient and immovable in his stride. Julian followed half a pace behind on her right, watchful and composed, while Knox moved on her left with loose, untroubled confidence, his gaze already sweeping the chamber with open curiosity and the faint spark of amusement that never quite left his eyes. Rows of council members rose as one when they approached the table. Men and women in immaculate tailoring, their suits and silks arranged to conceal more than they revealed, their eyes sharp with intelligence and tempered by long familiarity with power, every gaze fixed squarely on her. Attention pressed against her skin from every direction, heavy and tangible, like warm hands resting on her shoulders. She reached the center of the table and came to a stop. Maddox drew out the chair at the head position and waited, silent and unhurried, until she seated herself before he took the place at her side, close enough that their shoulders nearly aligned. The room noticed. A ripple of exchanged glances moved along the table. A woman near the far end leaned back slightly, studying the arrangement with keen interest, her eyes bright with calculation. The man at the head of the council cleared his throat, his voice smooth with practiced authority. "Lady Blackthorne, welcome." Kate met his gaze without lowering hers. "Thank you. You understand the purpose of this assembly." "To confirm the inheritance," she answered. "To assess your suitability," another voice added from down the table. Knox tilted his head, lips curving faintly. "Delightful phrasing." A few council members allowed themselves thin smiles. Julian shot him a warning look. Maddox held perfectly still. The councilman lifted a hand. "Let us proceed." Questions arrived in swift succession, measured and relentless. They asked about her education and her upbringing, her grasp of the estate's structure, her understanding of pack governance and territorial allegiance. Kate answered with careful honesty, drawing on instincts she'd never had reason to trust before this morning, words forming with surprising clarity beneath the weight of so many watching eyes. When she paused to gather a thought, Maddox supplied context in a low, steady voice that reinforced her answers rather than overtaking them. His tone calm and precise, protective without presuming ownership. A councilman leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Experience appears limited." Maddox spoke before the implication could settle. "Experience can be cultivated. Instinct arrives fully formed." The room shifted. The woman at the far end leaned forward now, her gaze fixed on him. "And you're certain she carries that instinct?" "I am." The certainty in his voice struck like a gavel. Knox glanced at Kate with unconcealed appreciation. "Told you he admired you." Warmth crept into her cheeks. Julian hid a small smile behind his coffee cup. The questioning deepened and sharpened, politics threading into territory and territory into allegiance, each inquiry testing the shape of her resolve. As minutes stretched into a long, taut span of scrutiny, she felt the chamber itself pressing closer, a subtle tightening in the air that spoke of hierarchy rather than hostility, of rank and order settling around her shoulders like a mantle she hadn't yet learned to wear. When voices lifted in challenge, Maddox shifted a fraction closer, his knee brushing hers beneath the table, his presence anchoring the space around her in a quiet circle of steadiness that made her next breath come easier. She felt it. She stayed exactly where she was. At last the head councilman folded his hands. "The bloodline stands confirmed. The claim is legitimate." Relief unfurled through her chest like a slow opening wing. But legitimacy alone does not guarantee stability. The relief stilled. "We require immediate assurance of continuity." Kate's gaze moved across the table. Meaning? The woman at the far end answered, "The will recommends marriage. The council requires it." Silence spread wide and absolute. Maddox turned toward them, his voice low and controlled. The will offered counsel, not command. "The council commands," the woman replied evenly. "Recognition follows a declared political union. Without it, the claim remains provisional." Her pulse hammered in her throat. "You're telling me the throne demands a wedding." "We're telling you the throne demands continuity." Julian's hand tightened on the back of her chair. Knox's easy smile vanished. Maddox leaned forward slightly. "And your recommendation?" The council exchanged a final knowing glance. The head councilman inclined his head. "Lord Maddox Blackthorne." The name rang through the chamber. Kate turned toward him. He held her gaze with quiet gravity. He'd already seen this coming. "Your leadership unifies the Pax," the councilman continued. "Your reputation commands allegiance. A union between you secures immediate recognition." Heat gathered behind her eyes as the weight of inevitability pressed down all at once. Maddox drew a slow breath and spoke only to her. "You choose your own path." The woman's voice slipped back into the silence. "Without the marriage, recognition lingers in suspension." The meaning came sharp and clear. Suspension invited fracture. Fracture invited war. Knox leaned in, his voice low and quick. "For the record, I make a terrible political choice and a spectacular scandal." Julian shot him a look that promised later consequences. Kate managed a faint, breathless laugh. Then her eyes returned to Maddox. "You would stand beside me for this?" she asked softly. "For the crown," he answered, his voice steady as stone. The answer pierced deeper than she expected. She drew one slow breath and let it go. "All right?" The chamber exhaled as one. The head councilman smiled. "Then the engagement will be announced immediately." Kate's fingers tightened on the table edge. "Engagement." "The union requires public confirmation," the woman said. "Stability demands clarity." Maddox rose and extended his hand to her, palm open, expression grave and resolute. She placed her fingers in his. The doors opened. Sunlight flooded the corridor beyond, and the first burst of flashbulbs shattered the hush before they even crossed the threshold. By the time they stepped into the courtyard, reporters surged forward in a rising tide of voices and raised cameras, her old name and her new one colliding in the air around her. Hands reached, cameras flared, questions struck like thrown stones. Maddox's hand settled at the small of her back, guiding her through the crush with unwavering authority. Julian moved close at her other side, a steady shield of quiet vigilance. Knox grinned into the chaos like a man welcoming a storm. A microphone thrust toward her face. "Lady Blackthorne, is it true you're engaged to the future king?" Maddox's voice cut cleanly through the roar. "Yes." The single word echoed across the courtyard, clear and irrevocable. Kate's breath left her in a rushing wave. And in that bright, relentless instant beneath the sun and the cameras and the unblinking eyes of the world, her life stepped fully into the shape of its new destiny. She was promised. Chapter 8. The Wedding and the Headlines. The ceremony unfolded scarcely 3 hours after the council chamber emptied, the decision descending upon Kate's life with the inevitability of weather rolling over open land. Time compressed into a whirl of movement and hushed urgency, corridors stretching and folding around her as quiet hands guided her from room to room, voices passing over her like distant currents, while doors opened and closed with smooth, unquestioning obedience, the manner itself carrying her forward as though it had already memorized the path she would take. She found herself returned to the East Suite where 2 women waited in poised silence beside the bed, gowns draped across ivory covers like poured light. One introduced herself as a stylist with a warm, efficient smile. The other worked in utter concentration, speaking only through gesture as she arranged fabrics and tools with meticulous care. They lifted Kate's hair from her shoulders, measured the fall of cloth against her waist, and asked questions in tones of gentle professionalism that felt less like choice and more like ritual. "What style do you prefer, my lady?" The title brushed against her ears like unfamiliar music. "Simple," she answered softly. "Please." Simplicity here arrived in the language of silk and hand-stitched lace, ivory fabric flowing over her skin with the smooth weight of water, fitted through the waist in clean, elegant lines that carried quiet authority. The gown shaped her posture and lengthened her silhouette, beautiful with the restrained confidence of something designed to be witnessed by history rather than admired in passing. The dress settled on her shoulders like regalia. When they finished, she stood before the mirror and held her own gaze, breath steadying as she took in the woman reflected there. Composure framed her features, calm graced her stance, and strength lingered in the lift of her chin. Yesterday's waitress had become a sovereign figure carved in pale silk and afternoon light. She looked like a queen. The realization sent a tremor through her. A knock sounded. Julian stepped inside, his suit now a soft, pale gray that lent his eyes a gentler hue. He halted at the threshold, something unguarded crossing his face before discipline smoothed it away. "You look extraordinary," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, warmth touching the words. He offered his arm with careful courtesy. "They're waiting." The chapel rested in the eastern wing, a chamber hewn from pale stone and illuminated by tall windows that spilled molten afternoon light across polished floors. Carved benches held council members and pack elders seated in solemn rows, their presence lending weight to the still air. No flowers softened the space, no music drifted beneath the vaulted ceiling, and the absence of personal touches carved the ceremony into something austere and absolute. Maddox stood at the front. Black clothed him from shoulder to polished shoe, the suit cut with ruthless precision that transformed his stillness into armor. When his green eyes met hers, a flicker of something fierce and fleeting sparked there before control sealed it away. He stepped forward to meet her at the aisle's edge. His hand closed around hers, firm and steady, warmth anchoring her in the present moment. "Are you certain you wish to proceed?" he asked in a voice meant for only her. She searched his face, tracing every disciplined line for reassurance, for vulnerability, for some sign that this union carried personal meaning beyond duty. Restraint held his expression like a drawn blade. "Yes," she said. The vows flowed in measured phrases shaped by law and lineage, words of unity and continuity, stewardship and shared governance, promises etched for the sake of stability rather than sung for love. When he slid the ring onto her finger, his touch brushed her skin with careful deliberation, warmth restrained by respect and distance. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant declared. The chapel inhaled as one. Maddox paused for the span of a heartbeat. Then his lips met hers in a brief, deliberate touch, warm and composed, a seal of alliance rather than surrender, gone before the echo of contact reached her chest. Applause rose in dignified rhythm, measured and respectful, the sound of agreement more than celebration. As they turned toward the aisle, Kate caught Knox's gaze from the second row, dark eyes bright with open appreciation and a knowing curve at the corner of his mouth. Beside him, Julian stood pale and silent, hands clasped tight before him, as though holding himself steady through sheer will. Beyond the chapel doors, the world erupted. Sound crashed over them in a rising wave of voices and camera shutters, names hurled through the air in overlapping cries. "Kate Miller! Katarina Blackthorne! Lady Blackthorne, this way! Lord Maddox, confirm the political union!" Hands surged forward, microphones thrust toward them, flashes bursting so bright they painted the air in stuttering white. Maddox's arm swept around her waist with decisive strength. The contact jolted her senses, yet his hold guided her through the throng with unwavering authority, his presence part shield, part command, as the crowd parted instinctively before him. Security closed ranks behind them, but the path had already opened at his advance. Yes, he answered calmly to a shouted question. The engagement stands confirmed. The marriage has been solemnized. The word marriage rang through the courtyard like struck steel. By the time they reached the waiting car, screens everywhere had begun to glow with her name. A phone lifted beside her displayed headlines forming in real time. Blackthorn heiress found dynastic wedding shocks council. Future king claims mystery daughter. She closed her eyes as the door shut, and the engine's quiet power carried them away. The ride back to the manor passed in reflective silence. Maddox sat beside her, stormlight flickering in his eyes as his fingers turned a small object over in his pocket, gaze fixed on the landscape rushing past the glass. When the car stopped, he stepped out first and offered his hand. "Your rooms have been prepared," he said. "Our rooms," she murmured. He inclined his head. "Yes." The marital wing awaited at the corridor's far end, a suite vast enough to echo with every footstep, its chambers unfolding into sitting rooms and dressing areas, before opening onto a bedroom dominated by a bed wide and immaculate, its surface pristine beneath soft lamplight. Maddox paused just inside the doorway. "I have council meetings this evening," he said. "Press briefings, security reviews." She nodded slowly. "Of course." He removed his jacket and laid it over the back of a chair with deliberate care. "If you need anything," he added, "ask." She looked at him, at the man who now bore the title of husband beside hers, a stranger bound to her fate through law and necessity. "Will you return tonight?" she asked softly. A fractional pause stretched between breaths. "Yes," he said at last. Then he turned and left. Kate stood alone at the center of the room, the silence blooming wide around her. Outside, helicopter blades thudded across the sky, their distant rhythms circling the estate like a crown of sound. Within the manor's walls, footsteps passed along unseen corridors, voices murmured in low tones, the life of a watchful pack moving in quiet patterns beyond her sight. She undressed with slow, careful motions, folding the ivory silk with ceremonial precision before slipping into the pale nightgown waiting beside the bed. The sheets welcomed her with cool softness as she lay on her side, gaze fixed on the far wall while distant sounds traced faint paths through the air. Somewhere down the hall, Knox's laughter drifted bright and unrestrained. Elsewhere, Julian closed a door with gentle care. And beside her, on the untouched half of the wide waiting bed, empty space stretched smooth and silent beneath the low, steady glow of lamplight. Chapter 9. The First Temptation. The training wing stretched across an entire lower quadrant of the estate, a vast, self-contained arena of glass, steel, and polished concrete that stood slightly apart from the ornate heart of the manor, its design devoted wholly to movement, discipline, and the relentless refinement of power. Light spilled through long panes of reinforced glass and angled skylights overhead, illuminating broad expanses of mat and platform, weight racks and sparring circles arranged with military precision beneath the clean geometry of exposed beams. Kate arrived there by instinct rather than intention. She'd set out simply to walk, to ease the restless energy coiled inside her after the wedding, after the vows spoken too quickly and the bed left half empty, after the echoing quiet of a room built for two that held only her breathing. Wandering the corridors had felt safer than remaining still, and her steps had carried her deeper into the estate, until velvet runners gave way to smooth stone and soft lamplight yielded to bright, recessed panels overhead. The air cooled as she descended, sharpening with the scent of sweat and leather and oiled metal, a clean physical tang that stirred something alert and restless in her blood. Sound traveled ahead of her in muted bursts. Laughter, voices raised in exertion, the rhythmic thud of impact against padded flooring. She paused before a wall of glass. Beyond it, the training floor opened wide beneath shafts of afternoon sun, gleaming surfaces layered in tiers of mats and platforms where bodies moved with practiced speed. And at the center of that motion, Knox. He wore a dark-fitted shirt clinging to the breadth of his chest and shoulders, sleeves shoved carelessly to his elbows, sweat darkening the fabric along his spine and collar. His hair had escaped its careful styling and fell loose across his forehead as he moved through a seamless sequence of strikes with a pack trainer, each motion swift and fluid, each shift of weight perfectly balanced. Power rippled through him in motion, not the blunt force of aggression, but the precise articulation of control, every muscle answering instinct before thought, every step landing exactly where it belonged. He flowed across the mat with the easy grace of a predator circling through familiar territory. The trainer stumbled back with a breathless laugh. "All right, that's enough. You're showing off." Knox lowered his hands, grin bright and unapologetic. "Only because you're slow today." The trainer shook his head and retreated toward the edge of the mat. Knox turned. His gaze found her through the glass. Something in his expression shifted at once, his grin easing into a slower, more deliberate curve, eyes warming with unmistakable interest, as though her arrival had fulfilled some private anticipation. "Well," he drawled, dragging the hem of his shirt across his brow and revealing a flash of bronzed skin that pulled her eyes away on instinct. "If I'd known the queen was coming, I'd have made it spectacular." Heat crept along her cheeks. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "Interrupt?" He crossed the mat toward her with unhurried confidence. "You're the highlight of my afternoon." She shifted near the doorway, suddenly aware of the glass between them and the airless closeness of his approach. "I was just exploring." "Exploration pays off around here," he said lightly. "You find interesting things." He stopped a few steps from her, warmth radiating from his skin, the scent of exertion and cologne and something wild threading low through her senses. His gaze traced the line of her throat and collarbone with open appreciation before returning to her eyes. "You look stunning for someone who married a king this morning." Her mouth curved wryly. "That's meant to comfort me. It's meant to be honest." She glanced back at the mats. "Do you train here often?" "Every day," he replied. "It keeps my head clear." "That intense?" He laughed softly. "Intense enough." "Want to come in?" She hesitated, fingertips brushing the doorframe. "I'm not dressed for it." His eyes dipped, slow and unapologetic. "Lucky for you, neither am I." Her pulse tripped over itself. She should have walked away. Instead, she said, "All right, just to look." His smile deepened as he stepped aside and opened the door. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the air wrapped around her differently, warm with movement and charged with the residue of effort. Knox resumed his stance and launched into a flurry of quick jabs, breath marking his rhythm as muscles shifted beneath his damp shirt. "You look dangerous," she said before she could stop herself. His grin flashed. "Careful. That sounds like encouragement." She tilted her head. "What are you training for?" "Control," he said easily. "Strength, balance, and sometimes—" his voice lowered into a velvet murmur. "How close is too close?" She met his gaze. "You're incorrigible." "Only with women who marry my brother." She held his eyes and stayed. "Show me," she heard herself say. "Gladly." His hand settled at the small of her back as he guided her onto the mat, the touch light enough to pass for courtesy yet deliberate enough to steal her breath. He positioned her feet, adjusted her stance, his chest close behind her until the solid length of him pressed against her lower back when he stepped in. Her throat dried. "Relax," he murmured, palms sliding to her hips as he corrected her posture. "Let your weight settle." His hands lingered, warm and steady. Then his body drew closer still, aligning with hers in a slow, unmistakable glide that sent heat spiraling low through her belly. "Knox," she warned softly. "Instruction," he replied, voice brushing her ear as he shifted his weight against her. "Purely instructional." Her breath faltered. He leaned close, lips grazing the curve of her ear. "If you ever wonder what kind of king I'd make," he whispered, "this is usually how I start convincing people." The world tilted. In one smooth, shocking motion, he spun her and sent her falling backward onto the mat, her body landing with a breathless gasp as his hands pinned her wrists above her head. For a suspended heartbeat, she stared up at him, pulse racing beneath his predatory grin. Then his shape rippled. Muscle and bone flowed like water reshaping its banks, and where Knox had knelt, a massive wolf now loomed above her, coat burnished brown, streaked with black, amber eyes bright with unmistakable intelligence. Her breath caught in wonder. "Oh." The wolf lowered himself, powerful forelegs braced on either side of her shoulders as he pinned her gently against the mat. Warm breath ghosting across her cheek before a broad tongue swept across her face in an unapologetic lick. Laughter burst from her, wild and breathless. "You are unbelievable!" His tail thumped against the mat. He nuzzled the curve of her neck with deliberate warmth, a shiver racing the length of her spine that held nothing of fear and everything of startled exhilaration. Then the wolf dissolved into motion once more. Knox returned in human form above her, hands still holding her wrists, his body pressed full length against hers, breath heavy, eyes dark and intent. For a single suspended moment, the world held still. "Still think I'm only entertaining?" he murmured. Her face burned. "Get off me." The words emerged soft and unconvincing. He eased back with a devastating smile and offered his hand, pulling her upright as her legs trembled beneath her. She smoothed her hair with shaking fingers, heart still hammering in her chest. "That," she said, breathless, "was wildly inappropriate." "Possibly," he agreed. "Highly effective, though." She shot him a look that carried more heat than anger. From the far doorway, a new presence settled into the room. The air shifted, tightening with quiet force. She turned. Maddox stood in the entrance, tall and immovable, green eyes fixed on Knox's hand resting far too near her waist. And in that charged stillness, control gathered around him like a drawn blade held steady by sheer will. Chapter 10. The Distance. The days that followed the wedding settled over the estate like a season caught between storms, heavy with movement and obligation, yet threaded through with an aching stillness that followed Kate wherever she went. Life around her bustled with flawless efficiency, footsteps echoing through corridors, voices murmuring behind closed doors, staff appearing with quiet precision the instant she crossed a threshold. And yet the one presence she sought most often existed only in passing glimpses and fleeting silhouettes at the far end of long halls. Being queen in waiting meant constant escort and careful attention, doors opening before her hand ever reached for them, meals arriving on polished trays without request, schedules arranged and rearranged around her name, and still the space beside her felt vast and unoccupied. Maddox dissolved into duty. He rose before dawn while the sky still wore its darkest blue and returned long after midnight, when the estate had settled into low, watchful silence. Council chambers held him for hours at a time, Study doors closed behind him while sealed folders arrived and vanished in swift succession, and whenever their paths crossed, his composure remained immaculate, his courtesy unassailable, his distance carved with deliberate care. He carried himself close enough that the warmth of his body brushed her skin in passing, yet his hands remained disciplined at his sides, every motion measured, every instinct held in iron restraint. Night after night, the wide bed remained smooth on his side. The first evening, she told herself the demands of rule weighed heavily on him. The second evening, she promised herself the rhythm would shift. By the third, she lay awake in the quiet glow of lamplight and let truth rise fully into her chest. Her husband gave his hours to the crown. The realization cut deeper than wounded pride. It reached into the fragile hope that had begun to bloom inside her and left a hollow ache where warmth had started to grow. Knox, meanwhile, filled the halls with irrepressible life. He found her wherever she wandered, appearing at her elbow with conspiratorial grins and playful invitations, guiding her through hidden staircases and lesser-known wings, sending cups of coffee with notes that coaxed reluctant laughter from her lips. His flirtation wrapped around her like bright firelight, open and unapologetic, desire worn proudly rather than hidden. Julian moved with quieter intent. He arrived with books tucked beneath his arm, walked beside her through the gardens when afternoon light turned the leaves to gold, listened as she spoke of her small apartment and her co-workers, and the strange grief of a life left behind. His attention settled around her like soft shade, offering understanding rather than urgency. Knox made her pulse quicken. Julian made her breathe easier, and Maddox remained an absence shaped by purpose. On the fourth afternoon, the silence pressed too hard to ignore. She found him by chance, or so she told herself, as her steps carried her once more toward the training wing. Sunlight streamed through high windows and lay across the mats in pale bands, dust drifting lazily through the air in slow spirals of light. The cavernous space stood empty of laughter and voices today, holding only the echo of movement. At the far end of the floor, Maddox moved alone. His jacket and tie lay discarded nearby, his dark shirt clinging to the breadth of his back, sleeves rolled high along his forearms as sweat traced gleaming paths along his throat and collar. Each strike cut through the air with brutal precision, each pivot grounded and exact, his body flowing through the sequence with the lethal grace of something born to hunt. Power rolled through him in contained waves, strength leashed by discipline so absolute it turned every motion into a promise of what he could unleash and chose, moment by moment, to withhold. She stood in the doorway and watched, breath slowing to match the rhythm of his movement, gaze drawn helplessly to the flecks of muscle beneath damp fabric and the measured rise and fall of his chest. He stopped mid-strike. Stillness fell across the floor. Slowly, he turned. Their eyes met across the distance. For a suspended heartbeat, something bright and fierce sharpened behind his green gaze, a glint of untamed light pressing close to the surface before iron control sealed it away. His jaw tightened. The brightness vanished. "Kate," he said, her name low and steady. She stepped inside without thought. "I came to walk." "You're welcome here," he replied, his hands curling slowly into fists at his sides as tension gathered along his shoulders. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. "How long have you kept your distance from me?" she asked, the question slipping free before caution could catch it. His expression remained carved from restraint. "I stand exactly where I must." She exhaled a soft, brittle laugh. "You haven't slept beside me once." A flicker of something raw crossed his face and vanished. "My duties claim every hour." "So does this marriage," she said, voice tightening. "I carry your name now." The words landed between them with quiet force. He drew a slow breath, chest rising beneath damp cloth. This union exists to protect the throne. Does that protection include pushing me away? His gaze held hers. It includes keeping you beyond danger. Her throat constricted. Danger from what? From a world that feeds on weakness. And from you, she whispered. His silence answered. Pain unfurled through her chest, sharp and clean. She moved closer, the heat radiating from his skin brushing her own, the charged space between them alive with restrained energy. You don't see me anymore, she said. His breath hitched once. I see you constantly. Then look at me. He did. Fully, intensely, his gaze traveling the length of her with an honesty that stole the air from her lungs and sent heat blooming beneath her skin. For a heartbeat, she felt the pull of him, fierce and undeniable. Then his eyes darkened and he turned away, hands clenching white at his sides. I must hold the line, he said quietly. If I reach for you, I will lose sight of what I guard. Her voice trembled. And what stands behind that line? The crown. The word struck like cold iron. She nodded once, breath shallow. I understand. She turned before the ache could deepen. The corridor blurred as she walked, humiliation and anger burning bright behind her eyes, until a sudden presence rose before her in the soft green shade of the gardens. She collided gently into Julian. Kate, he said, catching her by the elbows with steady hands. You're shaking. She swallowed hard. I thought strength would come easily. His touch remained warm and careful. Walk with me. She let him guide her along winding stone paths into the rose garden where petals drifted on the breeze and sunlight filtered through leaves in soft golden patterns. They sat side by side on a low bench, silence settling around them like balm. You deserve to be chosen, Julian said at last, voice low and sincere. You deserve to feel wanted. Her breath caught. You know so little about me. I know the shape of your courage, he replied gently, and the way your heart holds on. She looked at him then, truly seeing the quiet kindness in his gray-green eyes, the restraint that honored her space even as warmth radiated from his nearness. For the first time since the vows, comfort rose inside her without pain shadowing it. Across the estate, far from the bloom of roses and soft afternoon light, Maddox stood alone in the training wing, staring at the empty space where she had stood moments before. His breathing came rough and uneven, and deep within him, the wolf surged against its bounds, fierce and relentless, demanding release as control hardened into a battle he fought with every breath. Chapter 11. Julian. The library revealed itself to Kate like a secret kept in trust, a chamber of quiet warmth tucked deep within the manor's sprawling bones, and the moment she crossed its threshold, she felt the relentless weight of expectation lift from her shoulders as though the room itself had chosen to ask nothing of her at all. She'd found it by wandering rather than seeking, her footsteps carrying her through dimmer corridors after dinner had been cleared away with the manor's practiced, invisible efficiency, past doors that closed softly on routines that seemed to belong to everyone except her, until the air shifted and a mellow glow gathered ahead. Leather and cedar and old paper scented the space, the fragrance rich and grounding, conjuring the memory of rain against windows and long afternoons where choices were small and entirely her own. Shelves climbed toward the ceiling in stately rows, their ladder rails gleaming faintly in lamplight, while pools of gold illumination spilled across tables scattered with neatly stacked volumes. A fire breathed steadily in the hearth, each quiet crackle a heartbeat in the hush. Near the tall window, Julian occupied a deep chair with relaxed elegance, one ankle crossed over his knee, an open book resting lightly in his hands. He looked up as she entered, and the simple shift of his attention toward her eased something tight inside her chest, as if her arrival had been met with welcome rather than surprise. Are you hiding? he asked gently, closing the book with care instead of finality. I am wandering, she answered, the word carrying more truth than correction. His mouth curved in a knowing, tender smile. That counts. Kate moved deeper into the room, her fingers trailing along the spines of waiting books, titles blurring beneath her touch as her breathing gradually settled into the slow rhythm of the fire. This room held no audience, demanded no performance, and the absence of expectation loosened the set of her shoulders before she even realized she'd been bracing them. This is where I come when the manor turns into a stage, Julian said softly, his voice angled toward her rather than projected into the room. You can stay. You don't owe the walls an explanation. Relief washed through her so suddenly it stung. She nodded once, letting the silence cradle her as she pretended to examine the shelves. Behind her, Julian rose and set his book aside. He offered her space first, the respectful distance of someone who understood the fragile balance between nearness and intrusion, and when he spoke again, his voice came from just behind her shoulder rather than directly at her back. I saw you in the gardens, he said, her fingers stilled against worn leather bindings. Then you saw enough, she replied. I saw you holding yourself together by sheer will, he answered quietly. I saw how thin that thread has grown. Heat gathered behind her eyes, and she focused fiercely on the line of titles before her. I'm fine. You never have to convince me, Julian said, the words shaped by patience instead of doubt. She turned slowly. He stood a few paces away, jacket unbuttoned, posture relaxed yet restrained, gray-green eyes steady in the library's softened light. A faint tension rested at the corners of his mouth, the discipline of a man who chose his distance out of care rather than hesitation. You've been kind to me, she said, and the rawness of it surprised her. You've been alone in a house full of people, he replied. A brittle laugh escaped her. You say that like you understand. The manner raises us to be useful, Julian said. It teaches posture and poise and timing, and it teaches us to swallow anything that might disrupt the family name. She held his gaze. Is that what you're doing now? He swallowed. I'm choosing care. Because? Because you're married, he said simply, truth without accusation. The word twisted inside her. I was married by decree and necessity, and by a man who guards a crown like it might crumble if he reaches for me. Julian's expression tightened for a heartbeat, then steadied. You're angry. I'm humiliated, she admitted, the confession sharp as metal on her tongue. I lie awake in a bed built for two and listen for footsteps that never come. Julian stepped closer, slow enough to give her the power to halt him, and she stayed rooted where she stood. You deserve warmth that arrives without being summoned, he said quietly. You deserve presence that feels chosen. Her throat tightened. Then why do I feel invisible? Julian's eyes flicked to the ring on her hand and returned to her face with quiet conviction. You are irreplaceable. The words struck deep, filling a hollow she hadn't known how to name. He stopped just within the space that made her aware of every breath. His voice dropped, intimate and careful. I'm going to speak honestly, he murmured. Tell me to stop, and I will. Her pulse beat loud in her ears. All right. I believe you deserve to be wanted for who you are, not for what you represent. Her fingers curled against her palm. You've said that before? I mean it every time, he replied softly. And I think Maddox feels it too. He believes distance equals control. He believes restraint equals strength. Do you think he wants me? Julian paused, choosing truth over comfort. He wants you fiercely. That frightens him, because wanting you threatens the walls he's built around himself. The orphan girl, she whispered. Recognition sharpened his gaze. Yes. Whispers of another love stung beneath her skin, a bruise pressed from the inside. She looked away before tears could gather. "Kate," Julian said gently. She faced him again. His hand rose and hovered inches from her cheek, waiting in that delicate space between desire and permission. "May I?" Her breath came shallow. She nodded. His fingertips brushed her cheek with reverent gentleness, thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone before resting still. Warmth bloomed through her ribs, the simple touch grounding and profound. "You carry so much weight," he murmured. She managed a fragile smile. "It's an upgrade from carrying plates." His answering smile softened. "I would have tipped you outrageously well." A quiet laugh slipped from her, easing the tension between them. His hand fell, yet he remained close, eyes studying her with quiet wonder. "I shouldn't offer you this feeling," he said softly, "yet you deserve it." "You are making me feel wanted," she whispered. "Yes," he breathed. Silence settled around them, delicate and charged. "You're different," she said. "Different how?" "You see a person, not a position." Julian's throat worked. "You are both." A subtle current hummed through the air, the instinctive awareness she'd begun to recognize since learning the truth of the pack. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "Yes." "What is it?" "The pack's awareness," he said. "Our instincts rising when something matters." "Is that your wolf?" He went still, vulnerability flickering openly. "He prefers quiet." "Will you show me?" He studied her, weighing trust against risk, then nodded. "Only for a moment." He stepped into the open space by the hearth and breathed deeply, shoulders loosening as he welcomed a truth he usually kept hidden. The room tightened around him, pressure shifting the air. His eyes brightened with an inner light. Then he changed. Where Julian stood, a wolf now occupied the space, large and graceful, dark fur brushed with silver along his ruff, gray-green eyes intelligent and shyly watchful. He held still, offering her the choice to approach. Restraint shaped the moment into something tender. She stepped forward and sank her fingers into the thick fur at his shoulder. Warmth met her touch. Dense and alive, muscle shifting subtly beneath her palm as he leaned into her by the smallest measure. "You're beautiful," she whispered. His ears flicked, gaze steady and trusting. She stroked along his neck, the reality of him quieting her mind until only warmth and breath and firelight remained. He eased back, and Julian stood before her again, hair tousled, breathing slightly heavier. He braced himself for her reaction. "Thank you," she said softly. "That felt honest." Relief softened his features. "It is." "You didn't try to frighten me." "I would only ever want you to feel safe." The promise settled deep between them. His hand rose once more, brushing her hair back, knuckles grazing her temple before resting lightly at her jaw. Warmth spiraled through her. She tilted toward him, lips parting, breath mingling with his as possibility narrowed the world to the space between them. The library door opened. Knox's voice rang out with bright, irreverent cheer. "There you are! I've been combing this mausoleum for my sister-in-law." Kate startled back, heat rushing through her throat. Julian's hand dropped instantly, composure returning like a drawn curtain. Knox strolled in with predatory ease, hazel eyes flicking between them with delighted comprehension. "Well, that's interesting." "What do you want, Knox?" Kate asked, steadying her breath. His grin sharpened. "I want to know why you both look like you were about to start a fire in the library." Julian's voice cooled. "Leave." Knox's laughter rolled low. "I would." But Maddox asked where his wife was. He sounded almost concerned. Concern struck her like a spark of light. Knox's gaze slid back to Julian, amusement edged with warning. Careful. The crown dislikes surprises. Julian met his eyes. So do I. The air shifted again, pack instinct filling the room without a sound. Knox turned to Kate, charm wrapping his words in velvet. Come on. Your husband is waiting. Her pulse jumped at the word. She met Julian's gaze one last time, the unspoken moment lingering between them like heat from the hearth. Then she turned toward the door, choosing movement over fire. Behind her, Julian exhaled slowly, discipline settling back over him like armor. Kate walked beside Knox into the corridor, skin still remembering the feel of warm fur beneath her fingers and the almost kiss stolen by interruption. Behind the closing library door, the fire burned steadily on. Ahead of her, Knox's satisfied smile carried the unmistakable shape of a warning wrapped in charm. Chapter 12. The Whisper. The elevator wrapped around Kate in a cocoon of polished wood and mirrored glass, its air layered with expensive cologne and the lingering trace of library smoke that clung to her like a secret she could carry but never quite conceal. She stepped inside with deliberate composure, spine straight and chin lifted, even as her skin still hummed with the memory of Julian's fur beneath her fingertips, and her lips still held the ghost of a kiss that had hovered close enough to taste. She pressed the button for the east wing harder than necessary, and fixed her gaze on her own reflection as the doors slid shut, sealing her into a narrow, gleaming chamber that magnified every breath. Knox slipped inside at the last instant, the doors whispering closed behind him with soft inevitability. He entered spaces the way storms entered skies, without permission and without apology. Kate kept her eyes forward, every muscle in her face composed, determined to shape him into nothing more than an inconvenience when every instinct warned her he was anything but that. In the mirror, she watched him lean back against the wall, hands tucked casually into his pockets, posture loose and effortless, his attention locked not on her directly, but on the version of her that shimmered back at them from the reflective panel. You look flushed, he said, his tone smooth as silk sliding across skin. Kate's eyes narrowed in the mirror. That's an odd thing to say in an elevator. It's accurate, he replied easily. Accuracy happens to be my favorite quality. She exhaled slowly, breath steadying her pulse. If you're here to provoke me, take the stairs next time. Knox's smile curved, warm and sharp at once, humor gleaming like a blade catching light. I'm here because you wandered into my brother's sanctuary and came out glowing like you found something warm. Her stomach tightened at the quiet certainty in his voice. You followed me. I found you, he corrected gently. In our world, that distinction matters. Kate turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. Stop talking like a prophecy. I've had my fill of ominous truths. A low laugh brushed the air, and he pushed off the wall with slow intention, closing a fraction of the distance between them as the elevator hummed steadily upward. Her pulse answered him, traitorously quick. His gaze drifted to her mouth before returning to her eyes, heat smoldering there, the same molten attention she'd felt in the training wing when his body had pinned hers to the mat and laughter had tangled with breath. You're trying so hard to be loyal, he murmured, her jaw set. I am married. You're married to a man who treats you like a treaty, Knox said softly, the words edged with an almost protective irritation. He walked away from you like he'd just signed an agreement. Truth struck harder, spoken aloud. That isn't your concern, she said, voice taut. His smile softened into something slower, more deliberate. You became my concern the moment the council placed that ring on your finger and called it peace. Kate turned fully toward him, chin lifted. Then rejoice. The throne stands firm. Stability reigns. His gaze held hers with quiet intensity. You're the one struggling for breath. The lights flickered faintly as the elevator passed a floor, reflections shifting behind him like shadows stirred by unseen wind. She reminded herself she stood in a confined space with a werewolf prince whose hands had held her down and made her laugh while her body forgot its rules. Knox stepped closer again, and the air thickened around him, that subtle pack pressure pressing in from the edges as though the world itself had turned its attention toward them. Her grip tightened around her clutch. Knox. He listened to the cadence of her pulse rather than the sound of her voice. You want to know what makes Maddox dangerous, he said softly. You are dangerous, she answered. His smile flashed, bright and unapologetic. I'm thrilling. Maddox is lethal. The elevator slowed, a soft deceleration that heightened every breath. He moved nearer still, heat radiating from him in palpable waves, his scent clean and warm with a deeper, feral note beneath it. His gaze lingered at the hollow of her throat, where her pulse fluttered visibly. You're playing with fire, she said. His head inclined, mouth hovering near her ear, breath feathering across her skin. I play when I'm bored, he whispered. I claim when I desire. Her stomach flipped. Her hand rose before thought intervened, palm flattening against his chest in a silent plea for distance and an involuntary acknowledgement of the solid warmth beneath his shirt. Muscle shifted beneath her touch, alive and unyielding. Knox's eyes dropped to her hand, delight flickering there. Careful, he murmured. That looks like invitation. She drew back, and his fingers closed gently around her wrist, strength restrained yet unmistakable. Amber light flashed behind his hazel eyes, the wolf within lifting its head just long enough to show teeth before settling back into charm. A low, irritated sound escaped him, territorial and bratty in equal measure, before he released her with a flourish of mock generosity. The doors opened. Fresh air swept in like mercy. Kate stepped out, stride calm and deliberate, refusing him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Knox followed at her shoulder, every inch the prince who believed he belonged exactly where he chose to stand. Sunlight spilled across the corridor's polished floor, staff moving quietly in the distance while guards straightened at the sight of Knox's approach. She kept walking, composure stitched tight around her. You looked at him in that library like you expected him to choose you, Knox murmured beside her. Stop, she said sharply. The truth draws that word from people, he replied lightly. She halted beneath an ornate archway and faced him fully. You don't get to define what I want. His gaze softened for a fleeting heartbeat, tenderness edged with something dangerous. I can see it. And you can see I'm trying, she said. He nodded once, acknowledgement without argument. Then his gaze shifted past her shoulder. The air cooled at the edges. Kate turned. Julian approached from the far end of the corridor, folder tucked beneath his arm, composure smooth and eyes sharpening at Knox's proximity. He stopped a respectful distance from her. Kate, he said gently, Maddox is asking for you. Her heart kicked at the word asking. Knox's grin returned, lazy and bright. Your husband noticed your existence. Julian's jaw tightened. Knox. The humor in Knox's eyes cooled, the pack's dominance pressing outward in quiet force. Julian met the pressure with calm steadiness, shoulders bracing subtly without retreat. Kate stepped instinctively toward Julian. The movement was small and undeniable. Knox's nostrils flared once, his smile sharpening. Of course, you choose the gentle one. I'm choosing no one, she said quickly. Julian's voice remained even. She needs space. Knox kept his gaze on her. I'm giving her space. I'm simply occupying the same air. Kate drew breath to retort. A heavier presence settled into the corridor like a gathering storm. Maddox emerged from the side hall, charcoal suit immaculate save for a loosened tie that hinted at frayed restraint. His green eyes swept the scene with swift, ruthless calculation, taking in Knox's closeness, Julian's stance, and the honest angle of Kate's body. His jaw tightened. The corridor fell silent around him. "Kate," he said, voice calm and resonant. "Maddox," she answered, pulse leaping. His gaze flicked over her face, then returned to the space between her and Julian, a flash of dangerous brightness igniting behind his eyes before discipline pressed it down. Julian spoke with quiet respect. "You asked for her. I came to bring her." Knox chuckled softly. "Adorable." Maddox's gaze cut to Knox, brotherhood shadowed by fresh tension. "Go." Knox's smile held. "You want obedience or absence?" "I want you to remember who you address." Amber flickered again in Knox's eyes, a low growl brushing his throat before he straightened with lazy defiance. Julian stepped forward half a pace. "This ends here." "It begins here," Maddox replied evenly. Kate's voice cut through the rising tension. "Enough." Three gazes turned to her. For a heartbeat, Maddox's eyes softened, then hardened with renewed control. "Come with me." Knox's voice slid in smoothly. "Go on, wife. He hates waiting." The word wife struck like a dare. Julian's steady gaze met hers, offering quiet support without plea. She stepped toward Maddox. His hand hovered near the small of her back, guiding without touching as he turned and walked, the manner seeming to part around him in silent expectation. She followed, the echo of Knox's voice trailing behind them. "Congratulations on finally feeling something." Maddox gave no outward sign of hearing. Inside his study, the door closed and silence settled thick and private. He stood behind the desk, hands braced flat against the polished wood, shoulders rigid with effortful control. His green eyes held hers, sharp and wounded beneath the restraint. "You spent the evening with Julian." "I spent the evening in a library." "You are my wife." The words carried both claim and accusation. "You made me your wife," she answered, voice steady despite the ache, "and left me alone in a bed that feels like a museum. I carry the crown's weight." "Then stop wearing duty-like armor." Pain and jealousy flashed across his face before he mastered it. "You stood too close to him." "You don't know what closeness looks like in this house." Brightness flared behind his eyes, wolf-light straining against the barrier of will. His voice fell to a razor's edge. "I will not have the council laugh." "So that is your fear." Silence stretched, truth humming beneath every unspoken word. "This marriage was a contract," he said at last. "It became a cage." Something in him withdrew, posture snapping back into formal lines. "If you plan to disgrace the crown, we will end this before it becomes spectacle." Her breath caught. "End it how?" "Divorce." The word struck clean and brutal. "You want to end this?" she said slowly. "I want control before I lose it." "You've already lost something." "What?" She pressed her fingers to the ring on her hand. "My faith." The wolf surged close beneath his skin, light flaring once more behind his eyes before he forced it down with sheer will. She drew a steady breath. "Say it again when you can look at me and swear this has nothing to do with your brothers wanting what you refuse to claim." His gaze snapped to hers, silence slicing between them. She turned and walked to the door. He remained where he stood, hands flat against the desk, breathing unevenly as the world tilted beneath his feet. The corridor welcomed her back into its elegant hush, the manor alive with the subtle awareness of wolves who scented fracture in the air. Somewhere down the hall, Knox's laughter echoed, bright and dangerous, like a match struck in a room filled with fuel. Chapter 13. The Leaving. Kate did not cry when she stepped out of Maddox's study, and the absence of tears carried its own strange gravity, settling into her chest like a stone that promised it would fall later, somewhere quieter and more merciless. She moved down the long corridor with measured, deliberate strides, her spine straight as a drawn blade, and her breathing smoothed into careful, silent rhythm, while the manor around her held its composure with aristocratic poise even as something subtle and seismic shifted through its foundations. Servants paused mid-motion and lowered their eyes a fraction too quickly. Guards stiffened at their posts, with the sharpened awareness of wolves who scented fracture in the air, and beneath the polished calm of marble floors and gilded sconces, an unspoken understanding passed from room to room like a tremor along buried fault lines. By the time she reached the marital wing, her hands remained steady, though the steadiness felt carved from sheer will. The bedroom greeted her with lamplight and immaculate order, every surface pristine and waiting. Yet the vast bed at its center now held a different weight in her eyes, its smooth silk coverlet gleaming untouched beneath soft gold light until it resembled less a promise and more a monument to absence. She crossed the expanse of the room and lowered herself to the mattress's edge because standing felt like surrender and sitting felt like the last claim she still possessed. Divorce. The word echoed through her thoughts with cold clarity, a sharp syllable that sliced through the illusion of permanence and left only stark intention behind. She slid the ring from her finger with slow, deliberate care and placed it upon the bedside table, not as tribute to the marriage, but as tribute to herself, the diamond catching the lamplight and scattering it into bright, defiant sparks, as though it had waited for the chance to declare its own worth. Then she lay back against the pillows and fixed her gaze upon the ceiling, watching shadows drift across the plaster like clouds crossing a pale sky, and felt the truth rise in her chest with crushing, undeniable weight. Her life had fractured twice in a single turning of the sun, and this second break struck deeper than the first, because the council had taken her future and shaped it into law, while Maddox had taken something quieter and infinitely more fragile. He had taken the belief that she might be cherished. A knock sounded at the door, firm and restrained, the echo rolling softly through the stillness. Kate closed her eyes and spoke into the silence. "Go away." The latch turned anyway, because privacy in this house arrived by permission rather than right. Julian stepped inside and halted at once, his gaze taking in the loose fall of her hair, the brightness in her eyes sharpened by anger instead of tears, and the ring glinting solitary on the bedside table. Something in his expression gentled instantly, compassion softening every careful line of his face. "I heard," he said quietly, his voice shaped by sorrow and restraint. Kate pushed herself upright. "Of course you did." He closed the door behind him with deliberate care and leaned against it as if bracing himself against a coming storm. Knox heard too. A dry, humorless breath escaped her. "I'm sure he celebrated." Julian's jaw tightened, tension gathering at the hinge of his mouth. "He's furious." Kate blinked in surprise. "At me?" "At Maddox," Julian corrected softly, "at the situation, at the sound of something delicate shattering and the certainty that everyone felt it break." She turned her gaze away, staring at the pale shimmer of the silk coverlet. "I don't want to talk about him." Julian crossed the room and stopped a respectful distance away, choosing restraint with conscious intent. "Then talk about you." "There isn't much to say," she murmured. "I was married. Now I'm an inconvenience." "You are never an inconvenience," he said, the words carrying quiet conviction. She huffed a brittle breath. "You repeat that, like repetition might make it law." He exhaled slowly, shoulders settling beneath the weight of honesty. "He's wrong." Kate's eyes flicked back to his. "He believes he's guarding something precious." "He does," Julian said gently, and he's convinced himself that distance is the strongest shield he can raise. Her voice softened to a thread. Does it have to be? Julian held her gaze, and the pause that followed spoke louder than any answer. It could be something warmer. She pressed her palms into the bedspread, grounding herself in the cool silk. He said divorce like he was choosing a tactic. Julian inclined his head once. For Maddox, it probably felt like one. The truth struck sharp and clean, carving away any lingering illusion. Kate rose to her feet, resolve gathering around her like a cloak. Then I'll answer him like a tactician. Julian straightened at once. What are you planning? I'm leaving, she said, her voice calm and certain as stone set into place. I won't remain in a house that measures my presence as a problem to be solved. His breath caught. Kate. I'll go to the summer estate, she continued, eyes bright with steady purpose. It belongs to me. It's quiet. And there, no one will look at me like I've already failed. Julian searched her face, worry and admiration mingling in his gaze. You shouldn't travel alone. She met his eyes without wavering. I won't stay. The finality in her tone surprised even her, a quiet steel forged in the span of a single breath. Julian nodded slowly. Then I'll make the arrangements. Thank you. He stepped closer, stopping just shy of touch, every instinct in him held carefully at bay. You deserved more than this. The sincerity in his voice pressed against the fragile places inside her. I deserved honesty, she whispered. I thought I'd earned it. Julian's eyes darkened with fierce, contained emotion. You did. Kate swallowed against the swell in her throat. Tell Knox. A faint, rueful smile touched Julian's mouth. He already knows. A tired half-smile answered his. Of course he does. Julian turned toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. Maddox will regret this. Kate faced the window where night gathered beyond the glass. That regret belongs to him. He left quietly, closing the door behind him with the gentle finality of something carefully preserved. Silence returned and settled around her like falling snow. She crossed to the bedside drawer and drew it open, retrieving the simple twine bracelet she had carried since childhood, its fibers softened by years of wear, its knot tied by hands whose memory lingered only in warmth. The cord lay light and humble in her palm, and for a moment it seemed to hold every scrap of strength she'd ever needed. She wrapped it once around her fingers and felt its quiet steadiness, then let it rest again in her open hand. For so many years, it had been enough. Tonight it felt like proof of how little she'd been asked to keep. Kate closed the drawer with soft, decisive care and turned toward the door. Beyond the manor's tall windows, night stretched wide and waiting, its darkness edged with the promise of open sky and unclaimed breath. And somewhere else in the house, Maddox Blackthorn stood alone amid the relics of power and history, a matching strand of worn twine clenched in his fist so tightly that the rough fibers bit into his palm, pain blooming bright and welcome as the truth finally reached him. For the first time in years, strategy lay shattered at his feet, and the wolf, ancient and unyielding, knew it. Chapter 14. The Truth. Maddox found her in the east corridor as she was preparing to leave. Kate had changed into a simple coat and boots, her hair pulled back, her movements efficient and quiet. A small overnight bag rested at her feet, modest and deliberate, as if she were determined to take up as little space as possible even now. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps carried weight here, measured and controlled. The sound of a man who had spent his life making sure the world noticed him when he arrived. The corridor seemed to tighten around that presence, as if the manor itself recognized authority and yielded to it. Kate. She did not turn. You are leaving, he said. Yes. The word came easily. It surprised her. Maddox stopped a few feet behind her. She could feel him there, the restrained tension of him pressing against her awareness, the familiar gravity she had learned to register even when he refused to meet her eyes. "You cannot," he said. She faced him then, slow and composed. "I already am." His jaw tightened. "This is not a request." Kate's mouth curved faintly. "That has been the problem all along." Silence stretched between them, heavy and brittle. Maddox inhaled, visibly steadying himself. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same careful authority he used in council chambers and negotiations, the tone he reserved for decisions that had consequences. "The council will not view this favorably," he said. "Your absence creates instability. Perception matters." She let out a quiet breath. "I am not a perception." "You are the crown," he replied, "whether you want to be or not." "And you are still trying to keep me in place," she said calmly. "Even now." His gaze sharpened. "I am trying to keep you from making a mistake." Kate tilted her head slightly. Leaving a marriage that was already over does not feel like a mistake. Maddox's hands flexed at his sides. For the first time since he had entered the corridor, something strained visibly beneath his control. "You are allowed space," he said evenly. "You are not allowed to tear apart the crown." Her laugh was quiet and brittle. "I didn't tear anything apart. I just stopped holding it together for you." The words landed. Maddox's composure slipped just enough for her to see the cost of it. "This union was meant to stabilize everything," he said. "If you leave now, the council will interpret it as rejection. They will respond." "Let them," she said. "I am done living in anticipation of other people's reactions." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You are acting out of emotion." Kate met his gaze without flinching. "You are acting out of fear." The accusation hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Maddox's breath slowed. His hand moved, deliberate and careful, slipping into the inner pocket of his coat. Kate noticed immediately. He withdrew the bracelet. Simple twine, worn soft with age. The knot tied in a way that did not belong to this house or its power or its expectations. Maddox held it in his palm like something fragile, like something sacred. His fingers curled around it slowly, as if he were afraid it might dissolve if he loosened his grip. She walked to the bedside drawer and pulled out her own bracelet. Identical. The same worn fibers. The same knot. For a heartbeat, the corridor seemed to disappear, and recognition flashed across his face with brutal clarity, followed by something that cracked open so suddenly it looked like pain. "You kept it," he whispered. Kate looked at the bracelet in her hand, then back at him. "I kept it because it reminded me that someone once chose me without needing a reason." "I did not know," he said quietly. Kate's chest tightened because she knew exactly what he meant. "If I had known who you were," he continued, voice low and roughened by restraint, "if I had known the girl I searched for had been standing in front of me this entire time, I would have—" Maddox took another step forward, urgency breaking through the discipline he clung to. "Kate!" She dropped the bracelet. It hit the stone floor between them with a soft, final sound. Maddox froze. The silence that followed was absolute. "I am not your memory," Kate said. "I am not your redemption. And I am not the reward you get for finally figuring out how to feel." Her voice did not shake. That frightened him more than anger would have. "I waited," she continued. "I gave you space. I believed every excuse you offered, and you still chose the crown over me every single time." "That was never the choice," he said hoarsely. "It was always the choice," she replied. "You just did not want to admit it." Maddox stared at her as if the ground beneath him had fallen away. Kate bent and picked up her bag. "I will not stay where I am only tolerated," she said. "I will not be managed, and I will not wait for you to decide I matter." She turned toward the door. Maddox moved, fast enough that the air snapped with it, his hand reaching out and stopping inches from her arm. He caught himself before touching her, breath uneven now, control fraying. "If you walk out that door," he said, voice raw, "I do not know if I can—" She paused, just long enough to look back at him. "You should have thought about that," she said gently, "before you taught me how to leave." The manor doors closed behind her with a final, echoing weight. The driver opened the car door without speaking, his expression carefully neutral, and she slid into the back seat with her bag at her feet. The door shut. The engine started. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as the car pulled away from the estate. The house receded behind them, all light and stone and history shrinking into the dark. Kate rested her forehead against the cool glass and told herself not to look back. The sound reached her as the car rounded the first curve in the road. It cut through the night with brutal clarity. A howl. Low and powerful at first, then breaking open into something ragged and raw, a sound so full of agony it raised the hair along her arms and sent a sharp ache straight through her chest. It carried across the valley, echoing off stone and water and trees, following the car as if the sound itself refused to let her go. Kate sucked in a breath that burned. Her hand flew to the window without her meaning it, fingers pressing hard against the glass as the howl rose again, louder this time, fractured and desperate, as if the creature making it was tearing itself open with every breath. Her throat closed. She knew that sound. She had never heard it before, but she knew it anyway, deep in her bones and deeper still in the place she had been trying not to feel since the wedding. "Maddox," she whispered. The car kept moving. Another howl followed, longer, broken in the middle by a sound that barely held together as sound at all. It was pain stripped of language, loss without dignity. A cry torn loose from something that had been held in a cage for far too long. Tears blurred her vision before she realized they were falling. She pressed her palm to her chest as if she could hold herself together by force, as if she could quiet the answering ache that had flared inside her the moment his grief found her. The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, uncertain. Kate turned away from the window, curling inward as the manor disappeared completely from view. The howls faded behind them, swallowed by distance and night, but the echo stayed lodged beneath her ribs, vibrating through her with every mile they put between her and the cliffs. Behind her, on the edge of the estate, the massive black wolf stood alone against the sky, chest heaving, throat burning raw as he howled until the sound finally broke apart and fell into silence. The wind carried nothing back to him. And for the first time in his life, Maddox Blackthorne understood exactly what it meant to lose the one thing he had been trying to protect. Because she had heard him, and she had still gone. Chapter 15. The Brothers Unite. The study smelled like smoke and stormlight, the kind of charged air that lingered after a decision had been made and paid for. Maddox stood at the window with the curtains drawn back, one hand braced against the glass as if the night outside could steady him. The estate spread beneath the cliffs in disciplined silence, lights placed with intention, paths traced with careful symmetry, wolves moving in the distance like shadows with purpose. Everything looked orderly. Everything felt ruined. His throat still burned. His chest still ached with the aftershock of sound that had torn through him until he tasted blood and emptiness. He had shifted back before anyone could see, because control was the last thing he owned, and he had already let Kate hear the truth beneath it. Behind him, the door opened. Knox entered first, moving with the restless grace of a man who could not decide whether he wanted to fight or laugh, which meant he was dangerous in both directions. His hazel eyes swept the room, sharp and bright, then settled on Maddox's back, with a look that held too much satisfaction and too much concern to be comfortable. Julian followed a beat later, quieter, measured, his gray-green gaze fixed on Maddox as if he was trying to read the fault lines beneath the suit and the title and the reputation. Neither brother spoke right away. Maddox did not turn. Knox broke the silence with a low, almost conversational tone that did nothing to hide the tension underneath it. "The staff is pretending they did not hear you." Maddox's jaw tightened. They heard. "They heard a wolf on the cliffs losing his mind," Knox replied, and his voice sharpened as he crossed the room. "They heard the kind of sound that makes the entire pack stand still." Julian's voice stayed gentler, which somehow made it worse. "Where is she?" Maddox finally turned. The firelight caught his face and made him look carved out of shadow, but his eyes betrayed him. His green gaze was too bright, too raw at the edges, as if he was still fighting something inside his own ribs. "She is gone," Maddox said. Knox's mouth curved slightly, then fell. "You let her leave." "I did not let her," Maddox answered, and the restraint in his voice sounded like pain dressed up as discipline. "She walked out of this house with her head high and her heart cut open, and there was nothing I could say that would undo what I already did." Julian's shoulders rose with a slow breath. "You asked for divorce." Maddox's silence was an answer. Knox exhaled through his nose, humor flashing briefly like a weapon he almost used and then put away. "Congratulations, you managed to commit emotional homicide without leaving a fingerprint." Maddox's gaze snapped to him, lethal. Knox held it without flinching. "Save the king face, Maddox. You already lost the queen." Julian stepped closer, voice controlled. "Tell us what happened." Maddox's hand moved toward the desk without thought, fingers brushing the edge of the wood as if he needed something solid to keep from splitting. The study had witnessed every strategic decision he had ever made, and now it watched him stand in the aftermath of the first one that mattered. "She was packing," he said. "I tried to stop her." Knox's eyes narrowed. "You tried to stop her with logic." Maddox's jaw flexed. "I tried to stop her with the truth." Julian's gaze sharpened. "Which truth?" Maddox's hand slid into his inner pocket. The movement alone changed the room. Knox's posture shifted, the lazy looseness vanishing as if someone had tightened a chain. Julian went still, attention locking on Maddox's hand with quiet intensity. Maddox withdrew the twine bracelet. It looked obscene in his palm, too simple for the power he carried, too old for the world they lived in, too soft for the way he had been holding everything else. Knox stared. "What is that?" Julian's expression altered in a way Maddox recognized immediately. Recognition, understanding, a sudden alignment of old whispers. Maddox's voice dropped. "She had one." Silence thickened, heavy and immediate. Knox's brows lifted slowly. "She had one," he repeated, and the words sounded almost unbelieving. "She pulled it out of her drawer," Maddox said, and the memory cut across him hard enough that he tasted iron. "It was identical. Same knot, same wear, same damned thread." Julian's throat worked. "The orphan girl." Maddox's eyes closed for a single beat, and when they opened again, the green in them looked haunted. "She is the orphan girl." Knox went very still, the way an animal goes still right before it chooses violence. "You are telling me that the child you have been grieving for your entire adult life has been living as Kate Miller, serving coffee, and you married her like a hostile takeover." Maddox's mouth tightened. "I did not know." Julian's voice softened, but it did not excuse him. "You saw her bracelet?" "I saw it when she showed it to me," Maddox said, and his control cracked slightly around the edges. "She held it like it was the last honest thing she owned. Then she dropped it on the stone floor between us, and she walked out." Knox let out a slow breath that sounded too close to a growl, and then forced it back into a man's lungs. She dropped it. Maddox hung his head. She tossed it at my feet like discarded trash. Julian's gaze flicked to Maddox's hand, to the worn twine. You searched for her. For years, Maddox said. I promised myself I would find her, and I promised myself I would make the world safe enough for her to exist without being hunted for what she was. Knox's laugh came out sharp, without humor. You made the world safe enough, and then you made her feel disposable inside it. The words struck, because they were accurate. Maddox absorbed them without flinching, which only proved how badly they landed. She said I taught her how to leave, Maddox said quietly. She was right. Julian took a step closer, expression controlled, voice steady. Where did she go? The summer estate, Maddox replied. She said she wanted quiet. She said she wanted space where she would not be watched like a liability. Knox's eyes flashed. You let her go to a place that belongs to her alone, and you think she will answer your calls. Maddox's jaw tightened again. I did not come here to discuss my pride. You came here because you finally ran out of ways to pretend this is just politics, Knox shot back. Julian lifted a hand slightly, a quiet request for focus. What else did she say? Maddox's throat tightened. He forced the words out anyway. She said she was not my memory. She said she was not my redemption. She said she would not stay where she was tolerated. Knox's hazel gaze burned. She is right. Maddox met it. Yes. The admission changed something. It did not fix anything, but it cut through denial like a blade. Julian's shoulders eased by a fraction, as if honesty mattered even when damage had already been done. What do you want from us? Maddox stared at the bracelet in his hand as if it might tell him how to undo what he had broken. The twine sat across his palm, simple and merciless, because childhood promises did not care about crowns. I want her back, he said. Knox's mouth curved faintly. You want her back, or you want the crown intact? Maddox's gaze lifted. I want her back. Julian watched him for a long moment, as if searching for the truth under the words. He found enough of it to make a decision. We bring her home, Julian said. Knox's smile returned, slow and predatory. You mean you bring her home? Julian's eyes cooled slightly. All of us. Knox's gaze flicked to Maddox, then back to Julian. You want teamwork after a week of watching him freeze her out while you played gentle savior in a library? Julian's jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. She needed kindness. He refused to give it. Knox's grin sharpened. She needed a lot of things. Maddox's voice cut in, low and dangerous. Enough. Knox's eyes flashed, and his posture shifted again, wolf energy rising and then being forced down as if obedience tasted like ash. You do not get to say enough, he said. You do not get to draw the line after you pushed her to the cliff edge. Maddox stared at him, and the air tightened, because Maddox did not need volume to remind anyone what he was. Julian stepped between them before the room could become a battlefield. Kate is not a trophy. She is not a prize we fight over. She is a person who has been used as a symbol by everyone in this house, including us. Knox's smile faded. She will not forgive him. Julian's eyes held steady. She does not have to forgive him tonight. She has to be safe. She has to be given choices that are real. Maddox's hand curled around the bracelet again. She will not listen to me. Knox looked at him, hazel gaze sharp with something that resembled agreement. She will not. Julian's voice dropped. She might listen to me. Maddox's eyes narrowed and a flicker of brightness rose behind the green before he forced it down. You intend to go to her. Julian nodded once. She trusts me. She will answer my call. Knox's smile returned, quick and dangerous. Of course she will. Julian ignored him and held Maddox's gaze. You can come later. You can come when you can speak to her without strategy in your mouth. She needs time to breathe without your title filling the room. Maddox stood very still, and the stillness looked like a man swallowing pride, like poison. Fine, he said finally. Knox lifted a brow. You just agreed to let your brother go to your wife first. Maddox's voice stayed quiet. She is not my wife, in the way she should be. The words landed hard enough to silence Knox for a beat. Julian exhaled slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I will call her. Maddox's gaze locked onto the device as if it was the only thread left between him and the cliff. Julian hesitated, then stepped slightly away from them, because even in this, he gave space. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Maddox's chest tightened with every vibration of silence. On the third ring, the line connected. Julian's voice softened immediately. Kate. A pause followed, long enough that Maddox could imagine her glacier blue eyes narrowed with exhaustion, her mouth set with the kind of resolve that had walked out of this house without shaking. Julian listened, then nodded once, even though she could not see him. I know. You do not have to explain. Another pause. Julian's gaze flicked briefly to Maddox, then away again. Are you there? His shoulders eased. Good. I needed to hear that. Knox leaned in slightly, interest sharpened. Julian's expression tightened with quiet concern as he listened. You made it inside. He nodded again. All right. Take a breath for me. Maddox's jaw clenched as Julian listened to whatever she said next, because he could not hear her words, only the shape of them in Julian's face. Julian spoke again, gentle but firm. You do not have to talk to him right now. Maddox went very still. Julian's gaze lowered for a heartbeat, then lifted. I will not push you. He listened again, and the next breath he took looked heavier. All right, Julian said quietly. I will come. Maddox's eyes flared. Julian turned slightly away, as if shielding her from the room even through the phone. I will be there soon. You are not alone. He paused, listening, then answered with simple certainty. Yes, I promise. The call ended. Julian lowered the phone and looked at both of them. She arrived safely, he said. Maddox's throat worked. Did she? Julian's voice stayed even. She does not want to speak to you. The words hit like a clean blade. Knox exhaled softly, and his satisfaction could have been cruel, but his eyes looked darker than amused. Well, he murmured. Consequences are a fascinating thing. Maddox stared at the bracelet in his hand until the worn fibers blurred. Julian's voice remained steady, purposeful. I am leaving now. I will bring her back when she is ready, and I will bring her back with choices that are hers. Knox's hazel gaze followed Julian to the door. You are going to play hero. Julian looked back. I am going to do what neither of you managed to do. I am going to treat her like she matters without asking what it costs me. The door shut behind him. Silence returned, heavier than before. Knox turned to Maddox, and for once his grin did not show up to protect him. If she never comes back, he said quietly, the crown becomes exactly what you promised her it would. Maddox's voice came out rougher than he intended. A battlefield. Knox nodded. And the worst part is that you will deserve it. Maddox did not argue. He stood at the window, green eyes fixed on the night, and the wolf inside him paced a cage that no longer felt secure. Outside, the estate held its breath. Maddox closed his eyes and finally understood the shape of the war he had started. He had conquered everything except the one thing he wanted. Now, he would have to earn it. And somewhere miles away, Kate sat in a quiet house that belonged to her, and she was choosing distance over the man who had made her a queen and then treated her like a liability. The summer estate rested in a hush that felt patiently gathered rather than imposed, a quiet earned by years of wind moving through the same stands of trees and dusk settling over the same low hills, until silence itself seemed woven into the land like another natural element. Kate sat on the wide stone steps outside the old house, wrapped in a thick knit sweater that carried the faint, comforting scent of cedar and banked fireplace smoke. And for the first time since the whirlwind of vows and crowns and corridors, her shoulders lowered from their guarded height, and her breath found an easy, unmeasured rhythm. The landscape unfolded gently before her, darkening hills rolling into layered shadow, while tall trees stood rooted and watchful beneath a sky slowly surrendering its last light. Here, no attendants appeared from doorways. No security detail traced the edges of her vision. No unseen eyes waited for her to speak, or smile, or stand straighter. The stillness opened around her like an invitation to simply exist. The house behind her bore its age proudly. Stone softened by decades of weather, beams darkened by seasons of firelight and winter storms, built for retreat and refuge, rather than spectacle or ceremony. It held no expectation, no audience, only walls that had learned the art of shelter. And within that quiet simplicity, she felt her own pulse finally match the unhurried cadence of the land. Her phone lay beside her on the step, its dark screen reflecting a faint sliver of moonlight. She'd left it untouched long enough for the world to feel distant. When it vibrated against the stone, the sudden sound cut cleanly through the calm, sharp enough to make her heart jump. She reached for it slowly, already certain of the name she would see. Julian. His voice met her the instant she answered, relief threaded through every syllable. Kate, I was worried you might not pick up. I'm here, she said softly. I made it. I know, he replied, warmth settling into the word. I wanted to hear it from you. She leaned back against the cool stone pillar and let the quiet wrap around her again. It's quiet here. I'm glad, Julian said. You sound steadier. I feel steadier, she admitted, surprise and unease braided together in her chest. That steadiness scares me a little. A thoughtful pause followed. Because it feels like letting go. Yes. The silence between them held comfort and care, stretching without strain. I'm coming to you, Julian said gently, the decision shaped by certainty rather than impulse. Kate closed her eyes and let the night air brush her face. You don't have to. I want to, he answered, simple and sincere. You deserve someone who arrives because you matter. Gratitude tightened her throat. Thank you. Soft movement rustled on his end of the line, the faint sound of fabric shifting as he moved with purpose. I'll be there before morning. All right. A breeze stirred through the trees, leaves whispering against one another in a susurrus that carried farther than it should have, and a subtle prickle traced the back of her neck as though the land itself had turned its attention toward her. Julian's tone sharpened with instinct. Kate, are you outside alone? She frowned at the sudden tension in his voice. Yes. Why? Because something just shifted, he said carefully. It might be nothing. I want you inside anyway. Unease slid into her bones. Julian. Go inside, he urged. Lock the door. She rose, the sweater slipping from her shoulders as she took a few quick steps toward the entrance. I don't see anything. I know, he said. Go in. Then the air itself changed. A pressure gathered deep and heavy, like the earth drawing in a breath and holding it tight beneath the weight of unseen eyes. Kate stopped. Her phone crackled faintly in her hand. Kate, Julian called again, urgency rising. She turned. Movement exploded from the tree line in a coordinated rush of dark shapes and sudden force, hands clamping around her arms from behind, with crushing certainty that tore the breath from her lungs. Her phone slipped from her fingers and struck the stone, skidding away, while Julian's voice still poured from the fallen speaker. Panic surged hot and blinding through her veins. She fought with everything she had, heels driving backward, shoulders twisting, muscles straining as instinct clawed its way to the surface. A cloth slammed over her mouth and nose, the sharp chemical reek flooding her senses, bitter and wrong and suffocating. She forced air into her lungs anyway. The scream ripped free of her throat in a raw, unrestrained arc of sound, terror and fury and refusal, braided into a single piercing cry that tore across the hills and shattered the quiet. Julian! The world lurched as she was dragged backward, boots scraping stone, fingers clawing for purchase against unyielding grips. Her fallen phone lay face up on the step, Julian's voice breaking with fear through the tiny speaker. Kate! Kate! The cloth pressed tighter, her vision swam. She kicked again, nails tearing skin, teeth sinking into coarse fabric as she fought for a breath that wouldn't burn. Another scream tore from her, higher and ragged, a final, desperate flare of sound that carved itself into the night. Then darkness folded inward, swift and absolute, and the world vanished. Miles away within the stone heart of the Blackthorn estate, Maddox went utterly still. He stood braced against his desk, one hand flat on polished wood, when the scream struck him with the force of a blade driven clean through his chest. It carried no distance, no delay, no barrier of walls or miles or reason. It reached him as recognition, as bond, as truth. Kate! His breath left him in a violent rush. The wolf surged forward with such ferocity that it shook him to his core, instinct detonating into certainty before thought could form words. She's been taken. The statement landed hard and unyielding. Knox shot to his feet, chair scraping across the floor. What? The phone on the desk vibrated in furious pulses. Maddox snatched it up. Julian's voice burst through the line, edged with fear. Maddox. I heard her scream. I lost the line. I'm tracing it now. Rage and terror fused inside him into a single unstoppable drive. She is mine, Maddox said, the words rising from a place older than kings or crowns. Knox swore, already moving. She's at the summer estate. I know. Heat ripped through Maddox's body as the shift tore free, muscle and bone reshaping beneath a force that refused restraint. A sound burst from his throat, deep and savage and absolute. It was a promise of pursuit. By the time Knox and Julian reached the doorway, a massive black wolf had already launched into the night, racing across the cliffs with impossible speed, shadow-devouring distance in great, relentless strides. The hunt had begun. Chapter 17. The Hunt. The forest rose up around Maddox in a blur of shadow and motion as he hurled himself into the night, his massive paws striking stone and root with such violent force that the ground itself seemed to fracture beneath each thunderous impact. He ran with a speed that devoured distance, a black shape tearing through silvered moonlight, branches whipping and snapping in his wake as though the wilderness itself bowed and shattered to clear his path. Wind chased him and failed. Instinct gripped him with merciless clarity, a blazing tether that dragged him eastward with savage urgency, every stride fueled by the echo of Kate's terror reverberating through his bones. Her fear pulsed inside him in jagged, piercing waves, confusion, panic, and beneath it a dreadful thinning, a slipping away that rang through the bond like a fading heartbeat. Understanding struck him with brutal force. They had drugged her. The realization detonated through his chest like lightning finding iron, obliterating every last fragment of restraint and replacing it with something vast, cold, and absolute. Rage filled him with crystalline purpose, a sharpened certainty that cut through every distraction until only one truth remained. She was his to protect, and something had dared to touch her. The transport van burst into view at the edge of the service road, its dark bulk racing through the night without lights, engine howling as it tried to outrun the reckoning racing toward it. It would not outrun him. The wolf struck the vehicle at full force, his massive body colliding with steel in a cataclysmic explosion of sound and motion. Metal screamed and glass erupted outward in glittering shards as the van fishtailed across gravel, slammed into the embankment, and rolled in a crushing spiral of twisted frame and choking dust. He was on it before it stopped moving. Fury drove every motion as he ripped into the wreckage, claws tearing through warped metal, jaws closing on living flesh with lethal finality. The men inside barely formed their terror into sound before that sound ended, their bodies crumpling beneath a storm of muscle and teeth that paused only to seek the next heartbeat. One man dragged himself across the broken ground, fingers clawing for escape. The wolf descended and ended the crawl in a single crushing motion before moving on, momentum unbroken. Another reached for a weapon with shaking hands. The wolf removed the threat with savage efficiency, steel and blood scattering across the stones as silence fell in his wake. The back doors held fast, bound shut with brutal intention. A roar tore from him, deep and raw and absolute, shaking the trees and sending birds bursting skyward in startled flight. With a wrenching surge of strength, he ripped the doors open, metal shrieking apart beneath his claws. Kate lay inside the wrecked interior, her body slumped and still against the cold floor. Moonlight spilled across her face, pale and slack beneath the haze of whatever poison clouded her breath, wrists bound tight, ankles cinched, her chest rising in shallow, uneven pulls of air that scraped terror through his veins. She lived, barely. For the span of a heartbeat, time faltered. Then the shift tore through him, bones and sinew reforming in a violent surge as human hands replaced claws, arms reaching for her with desperate, unguarded urgency. He caught her before gravity claimed her weight, gathering her against his chest with a sound that rose from him raw and broken and sacred. Kate. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breath faint and fragile against his throat. The scent of the drug hit him then, acrid and chemical and vile, igniting something feral and merciless inside his ribs. His fingers trembled as he tore the bindings from her skin, each restraint snapping away and leaving livid marks carved into the softness of her wrists and ankles. The men who still drew breath never understood what found them. By the time the last body struck the ground, the night had gone quiet again, broken only by Maddox's ragged breathing as he wrapped his coat around Kate and lifted her fully into his arms. He ran without pause, each stride devouring the distance between wreckage and safety, the world streaking past in bands of shadow and silver as he pushed his body beyond the edge of endurance. The wolf raged beneath his skin, furious and unsatisfied, craving more blood to spill, if it might purchase even a single steadier breath from her lungs. When the estate gates rose ahead, lit in pale gold against the dark, Maddox's body shook with the violence of everything he still held back. He burst through the doors with Kate cradled tight against him, boots striking marble in thunderous echoes as servants scattered from his path, their startled cries swallowed by the sound of his voice. "Healers!" he roared, raw and commanding. "Now!" They came running in a flurry of white and gold, hands reaching for her with practiced urgency. Maddox held her close until the last possible moment, fingers lingering at the curve of her shoulder, the silk of her hair, the fragile rise and fall of her breath. Her chest hitched once. His heart slammed painfully against his ribs. "I'm here," he whispered hoarsely as they lifted her from his arms. "I've got you." The doors closed behind the healers, sealing her away into light and motion and hope. Blood trailed across the marble where he had passed, dark streaks marking the path of a king who had chosen annihilation over restraint. Outside, the knight stood witness to the truth that when something sacred was taken, the world itself trembled beneath the answer. Inside, the wolf prowled beneath Maddox's skin, teeth bared and eyes burning bright, because though the hunt had ended, the reckoning had only just begun. Chapter 18. The Binding. The healing chamber awakened from decades of silence to receive her. Ancient stone and carved sigils drinking in the low amber light until the entire room seemed to breathe with a slow, solemn pulse, as though the house itself recognized the gravity of the moment and opened an old, guarded heart. Kate lay at the center of the great stone table, her slight form framed by symbols etched so deeply into the surface that shadow pooled within their grooves. Markings older than memory, older than the current throne, older even than the house that had grown around them. Soft light glowed along the curved walls in bands of warm gold and pale white, the two hues weaving together into a quiet radiance that stretched her shadow long across the floor. The air carried the scent of crushed herbs and salt, of iron and clean linen, underscored by a sharp medicinal bite that scraped along Maddox's instincts and set the wolf prowling restlessly beneath his skin. He stood at the circle's edge, every line of his body drawn taut, fists clenched at his sides until his knuckles blanched bone pale, his gaze fixed on her face with such ferocious intensity that the rest of the room faded to nothing more than distant movement and muted sound. The healers worked in coordinated silence around her, hands moving with reverent precision as they checked the shallow rhythm of her breath, the steady beat of her pulse, the bruised impressions circling her wrists and ankles. One brushed damp strands of hair from her temple, while another murmured in a language that curled through the air like smoke from an ancient fire, each syllable heavy with meaning that predated the pack's spoken tongue. Maddox's jaw locked so tight a pulse beat visibly at his throat. "She lives," the lead healer said at last, her voice calm yet strained by the weight of what she sensed beneath the surface. "The drug weakened her, yet her lungs still claim the air and her heart holds strong." Relief tore from him in a harsh, ragged exhale that scraped his ribs raw on the way out. The healer's gaze sharpened. The poison worked as a key, not an end. It softened her defenses so something deeper could be reached. His eyes snapped to her. "Say it plainly." She stepped to Kate's head and pressed two fingers to her temple, closing her eyes as a faint glow blossomed beneath her skin and pulsed in slow, resistant waves. The glow fought her. "We call the elders," she said quietly. "Now." The air shifted at once, the chamber tightening with collective awareness. Knox halted mid-pace along the outer circle, shoulders squared and breath held, while Julian moved closer to Maddox, his presence a steadying weight that anchored the edge of unraveling control. The elders arrived without ceremony, 5 figures crossing the threshold in unadorned robes, their authority carried in the calm gravity of their eyes rather than any symbol of rank. The air bowed around them as wolves stirred unseen in distant halls, sensing the turning of something ancient and consequential. One elder stepped to the table and studied Kate's still form, her gaze narrowing with sharpened perception. "This work seeks endurance, not swiftness," she said, voice low and certain. "It weakens the body to claim the blood." Maddox's voice roughened. "Explain." "They sought to hollow her strength," the elder replied, "to leave her mind adrift and her will subdued so her body could be taken for their design." Another elder circled the table, fingertips grazing the carved stone where faint power thrummed beneath the surface. "Old magic lingers here, awakened by violence." The healer inclined her head. "She carries a binding." The word cracked through the room like a struck bell. Maddox surged forward on instinct, stopped only by Julian's firm, grounding hand against his arm. "Bound," Maddox repeated, voice lowered into lethal promise. By whose hand? The elder's palm settled over Kate's sternum, eyes closing as her inner light flared against unseen resistance. This binding belongs to concealment, she said slowly. It cloaked her from recognition. Silence fell heavy and absolute. It was placed when she was a child, another elder added, her tone edged with ancient sorrow. A father's desperate shield. Maddox went utterly still. It hid her from the bloodline's call. The elder continued. Any who searched for the true heir would feel only emptiness where she stood. Julian's breath caught with dawning understanding. He veiled her and placed us in the light. Knox's hands curled into tight fists. A decoy in plain sight. Yes, the elder confirmed. The princes drew the eyes of the world while the heir walked unseen. Knox's gaze cut to the healer. Then the drug opened her. The healer answered grimly. It suppressed her defenses and sought to force conception through her body. The words fell like poison into the air. They aimed to seize the crown through her blood, the elder said. And in their violation, they stirred the ancient bind. Something inside Maddox tore free. He turned away, palms braced against the stone wall as breath ripped from his lungs in ragged bursts, the wolf hammering against his ribs with feral fury that demanded annihilation for the crime. Julian's voice stayed close. Maddox. He forced the words through clenched teeth. If they had finished, they failed, the healer said urgently. Her will fought back. The bind tightened, yet it never sealed. Hope and rage collided in his chest. Break it. The elders exchanged measured looks. We can, one said at last, and the severing will cut deep. Maddox stepped to the table and took Kate's limp hand in both of his, her skin cool and fragile against the heat of his grasp. Do it. The elder's gaze held his. The bind has aligned itself with you. Its breaking will tear through you both. His voice steadied into iron. Leaving it would steal her future. Break it. They formed a circle around the stone, voices descending into a low, resonant chant that set the floor trembling beneath Maddox's feet as power gathered like thunder trapped inside walls. Kate's body jerked. Maddox lunged closer, fingers closing around hers with desperate certainty. Her hand twitched faintly in his grasp. She feels the pull, the healer warned. He bowed over her knuckles, pressing his forehead to her skin. Kate, he whispered fiercely, breath shaking. You are seen. You are free. The chant rose. Light flared white gold and blinding. Kate's back arched as a cry tore from her throat, raw and splintering, a sound that ripped through Maddox's bones and turned the wolf into a roaring storm inside his chest. The elders drove the power forward. The ancient bind shattered. Backlash detonated through Maddox like lightning through marrow, pain tearing across his ribs as he dropped to one knee, still clutching Kate's hand as though her pulse alone held him upright. She screamed once more, then fell still. The light collapsed inward, shadows rushing back to claim the walls. For one suspended heartbeat, the chamber held its breath. Then the healer bent low, fingers pressed to Kate's throat. She breathes, she said, relief softening her voice. Deep and steady. Maddox sagged forward, forehead resting against the stone as the wolf fell silent at last, spent and shaking. The elder straightened, eyes bright with solemn certainty. The concealment is gone. Maddox lifted his head, eyes burning with purpose. And her. She will wake, the healer said gently. What was done to her leaves echoes, and her strength will rise through them. His gaze hardened into vow. So will my answer. The elders watched him without tempering the storm now gathering behind his eyes. Beyond the chamber, the pack stirred like a field of wolves lifting their heads to scent the wind. War had stepped into the present. At the center of it all lay Kate, freed from the shadow that hid her, her breath steady beneath healing light, her future opening wide and fierce and unmistakably her own. Chapter 19. The Awakening. Kate rose toward consciousness by degrees, awareness returning in slow, gentle layers that spread through her body like warmth flowing back into frozen hands, each sensation arriving softly yet unmistakably until breath and weight and ache gathered into a whole. At first there existed only feeling, the steady cadence of air moving through her lungs, the dull soreness threaded through muscle and bone, the faint bitter tang lingering at the back of her tongue, like the aftertaste of something endured and survived. Light reached her before sight, a diffuse golden glow pressing against closed eyelids in tender pulses rather than sharp intrusion, while sound followed as a low, distant murmur that hummed through the stone beneath her, less a noise than a vibration resonating through her ribs. Gravity held her with deliberate insistence, her limbs heavy against the surface beneath her, as though the earth itself had wrapped her in careful hands and asked her to remain. She drew in a breath. The air entered her lungs with strange clarity. It carried the layered scents of crushed herbs and cool stone and faint iron. Yet beneath those notes, something brighter stirred, alive and sharp and resonant, a presence that brushed against her senses and tightened her chest with unfamiliar awareness. Her pulse answered in deep, steady beats that aligned with something larger than her own rhythm, a second cadence rising from within. Kate opened her eyes. Above her, the ceiling arched in pale stone carved with symbols that shimmered at the edge of understanding. Sigils etched so deeply that shadow pooled within their grooves, and though their language eluded her mind, their meaning flowed through her blood as instinct rather than translation. Soft radiance pulsed along the chamber walls, the light brightening and dimming in gentle rhythm that seemed to answer her waking breath. She shifted. Her body moved with measured deliberation, muscles awakening in a careful cascade as sensation flooded every nerve at once, heat rolling beneath her skin in slow, demanding waves that called her attention inward rather than outward. Something within her stirred. Kate went utterly still. The sensation rose from inside her own chest, stretching and unfurling with ancient patience, a living awareness pressing lightly against the borders of her consciousness, vast and feminine and certain of its place. It did not rush. It expanded, testing space with the calm confidence of something long denied its rightful shape. She swallowed. Her next breath arrived deeper, fuller, drawn from a place newly opened. Across the chamber, Maddox stood rooted in place. Several paces separated him from the stone table, and he held that distance with visible effort, his hands clasped behind his back, as though he gripped restraint itself, his tall frame rigid with purpose. His green eyes never left her face, each subtle shift in her breath reflected in the tightening of his jaw, each flicker of movement mirrored by the tension running through his shoulders. "Kate," he said softly. His voice struck her like a sudden impact against still water. She turned toward him, words rising with startling calm. "Something's wrong." His head inclined once, eyes burning with reverence. "Something is waking." Her heart stumbled into a new rhythm. The presence within her answered his recognition, rising in smooth, patient arcs that stretched along her spine and coiled low in her abdomen, warm and powerful and unmistakably alive. Images flashed behind her eyes in quicksilver glimpses, moonlight spilling through unseen trees, balance shifting into 4 points of contact, breath deepening into wild air, awareness expanding outward until the world itself seemed closer. Her palm pressed against her sternum. "There's something here," she whispered. Maddox's expression softened with painful tenderness before control steadied his features again. There always was. Her gaze sharpened. Then why didn't I feel it? Because it was buried beneath bindings meant to hide you from every bloodline that searched, he said quietly, each word carrying weight. Those layers turned you inward and dulled your knowing. The word hid rippled through her. The presence inside her lifted its head, a subtle bristle that straightened her spine and drew her shoulders back with instinctive pride. Heat flowed through her again, gathering strength as it spread along her nerves in deliberate, sovereign waves. Her breathing deepened. Every detail in the chamber sharpened into vivid clarity, the faint scrape of fabric as healers shifted their stance, the slow lift and fall of Maddox's chest, the subtle way he held himself in careful stillness as though the space between them mattered. "You feel it," he said. She nodded, awe threading her voice. "It's been waiting for me." Maddox's eyes glowed with reverent relief. "She has." Understanding settled over her like dawn. "The binding began when you were a child," he continued, voice low and steady. "Your father veiled you from every searching gaze." A soft, humor-tinged breath escaped her. "He hid me so well that even I lived in the dark." She flexed her fingers and watched them steady with new certainty, every movement guided by instinct that felt older than fear. The veil had lifted. The world stood vivid and immediate before her. Her gaze returned to Maddox. He remained exactly where he stood. He offered presence without pressure, witness without claim. "Stay there," she said softly, awareness rather than fear shaping the words. "I will," he answered at once. Relief eased through her ribs. The presence within her settled into quiet watchfulness, coiling inward again like a queen satisfied with her throne reclaimed. "I can feel her," Kate whispered, wonder bright in her eyes. "My wolf." Maddox closed his eyes for a heartbeat, reverence passing across his face before he met her gaze again. "Welcome back." Her pulse spiked. "I never agreed to return." "I know," he said gently. The admission struck deeper than defense ever could. She drew her knees toward her chest, cataloging her body with new clarity. Bruises ringed her wrists and ankles in dark crescents, yet strength filled her limbs and steadiness filled her mind. Silence stretched between them, thick and deliberate. Maddox let it breathe. "You screamed," he said at last, voice rough with remembered fury. "I heard you." Her throat tightened. "I know." "I chose annihilation," he continued, each word carved from truth. She believed him, the certainty written in the tremor of his hands and the fierce devotion in his gaze. "What did they do to me?" "They drugged you," he said. "They meant to claim the crown through your body." Fury and nausea surged together. She steadied herself with a slow breath. "Why are you here?" He bowed his head, humility breaking through every practiced line of authority. "Because I failed you. Because asking forgiveness means standing where you can leave me." "You don't earn forgiveness by suffering," she said quietly. "You earn it by understanding." "I understand," he answered. "I used duty as armor so I could hide from wanting you. I gave you absence and called it protection." Her fingers tightened in the linens. "I taught you that you were tolerated," he continued, voice cracking. "And then I was stunned when you chose distance." "You asked for a divorce?" "Yes." "Say it again." He lifted his head, eyes bright with devastated truth. "I was wrong." The words rang clean and unguarded. "You don't claim me because you heard me scream," she said. "You don't hold me because your wolf rose." "I know," he said. "I asked to earn you because losing you stripped every shield away." She studied him in silence. "What if I say no?" "Then I guard you anyway," he replied. "I honor your autonomy and carry the cost of my fear." The answer settled deep. She swung her legs over the table's edge. Maddox rose by instinct, then stilled himself and held his ground. That restraint spoke louder than apology. "I'm not ready to forgive you," Kate said, "and I'm not ready to stay." "Then I wait." "Without strategy." "Yes." "Without pressure." "Yes." "Without claiming." His wolf stirred, yearning contained beneath iron will. "Yes." She met his gaze. "You kept your distance." "Yes." "You could have come closer." "Yes." "But you chose stillness." "I will never be the first thing that claims you," he said softly. "That choice belongs to you." The words settled into her bones. "Good," she murmured, "because when I touch you—" She let the promise linger in the air. "It will be because I choose to." Maddox held perfectly still. The wolf within her lifted its head, pleased and powerful, recognizing the truth spoken at last. "Listen first," Kate said. "I decide what comes next." He lowered his head in solemn acceptance. "I am listening." For the first time since crowns and vows had risen between them, Kate believed every word. Chapter 20. The World Responds. The chamber held its breath after Kate woke, the air itself shifting from frantic urgency into a poised, watchful stillness that felt less like an ending and more like the moment before a curtain rose on something vast and irreversible. The healers withdrew first, their soft-footed movements carrying them to the perimeter of the circular room, hands folding into their sleeves while their eyes remained keen and alert, every instinct attuned to the woman at the center of the stone table. The elders stayed where they stood, ancient and steady as carved pillars, their presence gathering gravity rather than demanding it, their gazes fixed on Kate, with the focused attention of minds recalculating the shape of the world. A variable had shifted, and the room knew it. Kate felt the change ripple through her with the quiet certainty of truth settling into bone. Her wolf stirred again, this time with composed awareness rather than tentative awakening, lifting her senses outward so the chamber brushed against her perception, like cool wind over warm skin. That subtle alignment straightened her spine and deepened her breathing without effort, drawing her upright into herself with a grace that belonged to instinct rather than intention. She stood in that circle as something newly undeniable. The eldest woman stepped forward across the carved stone, the hem of her robe whispering softly against the floor, and she halted several paces from Kate with eyes brightened by solemn recognition. Then she lowered herself into a bow shaped by deliberate respect. One hand pressed over her heart as one knee met the ancient floor, the gesture offered wholly and directly to Kate alone. The other elders followed her lead in seamless succession, each head inclining, each body folding into that same grounded acknowledgement, until the chamber held the echo of their reverence like a chord, struck once and allowed to resonate. Light flared behind Kate's glacier blue eyes, clear and cutting and brilliant, a sharp illumination that did not scorch, but revealed. And in that flash lived the unmistakable lineage of her blood. Her father's gaze returned, her wolf's truth unveiled, power carried in her very breath rather than bestowed by any hand. The elders rose together, and the eldest spoke into the charged stillness. "We acknowledge you," she said, her voice steady as stone and warm as firelight. "Unbound, awake, sovereign." The words settled into the chamber's bones, into the air between heartbeats, into Kate's chest where her pulse answered with calm authority. Her wolf rose fully now, stretching through her awareness with regal ease, neither baring teeth nor lowering her head, simply standing in her own undeniable presence and claiming the space as hers. Kate held their gaze without bowing, her stillness carrying the same gravity as their kneeling. "The binding has fallen away entirely," the elder continued, the certainty in her tone matching the hum beneath Kate's skin. Kate inclined her head once, feeling that truth sing along every nerve, a clean, steady vibration that replaced the muffled quiet she had once mistaken for herself. "What you feel," the elder said, watching Kate's hands flex with thoughtful wonder, "is recognition rather than awakening. Your wolf has always lived within you, waiting for her voice to reach the open air." Kate let her fingers curl and unfurl again, testing the new harmony between flesh and instinct. "She moves with calm purpose," she murmured, surprise softened by relief. "That calm will one day surge into storm," the elder replied, a glint of honest warning in her eyes. "Yet tonight it carries the grace of first breath." Behind Kate, Maddox stood in absolute stillness, every line of his body shaped by chosen restraint. He remained where he was, several deliberate paces away, hands held loosely at his sides, his attention fixed on her with a reverence so raw it burned. His distance spoke in the language her wolf understood, a careful honoring of space rather than an assertion of claim, and that quiet obedience settled deep into her instincts with undeniable weight. It mattered. Another elder stepped forward, voice edged with steel. "The violation attempted against your autonomy will summon consequence. Whoever shaped that design knew exactly what they sought to steal." Kate's jaw tightened, heat flashing behind her eyes. "They meant to turn me into a doorway." "They meant to crown themselves through your blood," the elder said. "They met your will and broke upon it." A faint tremor passed through the chamber, the pack beyond the walls stirring in shared awareness, their senses brushing the rising tide of power like sparks before thunder. "The pack already feels this shift," the eldest woman continued, her gaze never leaving Kate. "An unbound queen moves the world beyond these walls." Kate lifted her chin, voice clear and unwavering. "I am not an emblem." "No," the elder answered softly. "You are the force that sets events into motion." The word hung between them, heavy and luminous. Kate let it settle, let its weight press into her spine and anchor her feet, and her wolf leaned into that truth with bright curiosity rather than hesitation. "What unfolds now?" Kate asked. The elders exchanged measured looks, the air thick with unfolding consequence. "The council will gather," one said. "The attempt on your sovereignty challenges every alliance. Bloodlines will answer for themselves beneath scrutiny." Kate's gaze sharpened. "And you?" "We take our rightful place," the eldest replied, her voice carrying the promise of stone walls standing against a storm. "Between power and harm." Kate inclined her head once in acceptance. Only then did she turn toward Maddox. He met her eyes instantly, green gaze stripped of every mask, calculation gone and truth laid bare. He offered silence and waited within it, his stillness an act of trust rather than fear. "The elders say the pack feels this," Kate said softly. "Do you?" Maddox's voice came low and sure. "Yes." "How?" He drew a slow breath, eyes never leaving hers. "Like a locked door opening and fresh air pouring into a long-sealed room." Her wolf stirred, pleased by the answer's clarity. "Good," Kate said. The elders took her word as a quiet dismissal, their robes whispering as they withdrew one by one, until only the fading hum of ancient magic lingered beneath the vaulted ceiling, and the distant presence of guards waited respectfully beyond the doors. Kate remained at the center of the circle, breath steady, presence filling the space. Maddox did not move closer. The silence between them stretched wide and electric, a field marked by newly drawn boundaries, and the promise that crossing them would require invitation. "I will leave again," Kate said at last, her voice carrying the calm certainty of a tide turning. Maddox inclined his head without hesitation. "You will." "This time I walk on my own path," she continued, eyes bright and unyielding. Yes. I will meet presence instead of distance. Yes. I will stand where my will chooses. Yes. Her wolf settled into deep, satisfied stillness. Kate rose fully from the stone table, feet finding the floor with effortless strength, balance and power flowing through her body in smooth, sovereign lines, as if every muscle had awaited this permission to trust itself. Maddox shifted by instinct and caught himself in the same breath, honoring the space she commanded. She saw it, and that mattered. I will decide when I return, Kate said, voice steady as carved granite. And who walks beside me when I do? Maddox lowered his head to her, not to a throne or crown, but to the woman before him. When you choose to come back, every door will stand open. Kate studied him long enough to weigh the truth in his posture, the quiet reverence in his eyes. See that they do, she said. Then she turned and walked from the chamber, her steps measured and sure, her presence trailing behind her like the wake of a ship cutting clean through still water. Maddox remained where he stood, watching the space she had occupied as if it were the most perilous and precious ground he had ever known. In that lingering silence, understanding struck him with absolute clarity. Power rose from consent freely given. And Kate Blackthorne walked into the world no longer waiting to be chosen, but deciding who would be permitted to remain. Chapter 21. The Wolf. The place Kate chose rose beyond the estate walls in a wide, wind-carved meadow where stone surrendered to open grass, and the night moved in long, unbroken breaths, free of banners and boundaries, free of watchful eyes, free of any structure that might try to name what she was about to become. The moon hung full and steady above the hills, pouring silver across the land, with a clarity that sharpened every edge of shadow without turning the world into spectacle. And in that honest light, the earth stretched outward in quiet welcome, vast and unclaimed. She stood barefoot in the grass, her toes sinking into cool, springy blades that bent and sprang back beneath her weight, and the ground beneath her feet spoke in subtle textures and hidden contours that her body understood without effort. The gentle slope of the meadow revealed itself through her balance, the distance to the tree line mapped itself across her senses, and the soft scurry of small nocturnal lives beneath the soil brushed against her awareness like familiar names spoken in passing. Life registered as presence rather than threat. Maddox waited several steps behind her, exactly where she had left him when she'd said, in a voice quiet and immovable, "You may come, but you may not lead." He honored that boundary with absolute stillness, his posture open yet contained, his hands loosely clasped before him as though he held his strength in deliberate reserve, and his gaze lifted only as far as she allowed it to travel. The wind moved through the meadow and parted around her. Kate drew in a slow, deep breath and closed her eyes. The wolf rose within her with the inevitability of remembered truth, unfolding through her spine and settling into her bones with patient, intimate certainty. Heat gathered low and steady, grounding rather than burning, and her posture lengthened into effortless alignment as shoulders eased back and weight distributed itself with the graceful intelligence of a body returning to its native form. Her senses widened and deepened at once. The night layered itself into scent and distance and meaning. Stone carried mineral clarity, crushed grass released sweet green breath, and the air itself held the faint trace of Maddox behind her. His human heartbeat measured and controlled, while his wolf paced beneath it with disciplined intensity. She stood at the meeting place of two selves and felt only wholeness. No border divided her. No voice competed for command. Her wolf existed as language finally spoken aloud. You are safe, that inner presence conveyed, not as words, but as certainty that filled her lungs and steadied her pulse. Kate's lips parted on a soft exhale. Yes, she whispered. I know. Power flowed inward rather than outward, settling deep and heavy and immovable in the center of her being, and the meadow answered her with quiet recognition. Behind her, Maddox felt the shift move across the grass like a tide changing direction. It arrived as presence rather than force, as sovereignty contained entirely within itself, and instinct bent his gaze downward in instinctive reverence for the one who now stood fully in her own authority. Kate opened her eyes. Moonlight sharpened into clean, lucid detail, and she turned at last to face him. He remained exactly where she had placed him, his green eyes lifting carefully to meet her glacier blue gaze, as though even sight required permission. She gave none, and needed none. "I can feel you holding back," she said softly, her voice carrying calm clarity across the small distance between them. "Yes," he answered, truth unshielded. "Does it hurt?" "Yes." She studied him with measured stillness, her attention neither cruel nor indulgent, simply exacting in its honesty. "Good," she said. "That means you are listening." Recognition lit behind his eyes, a quiet relief shaped by discipline. Kate stepped closer, each movement deliberate and fluid, her wolf alert and watchful within her, without rising to claim or challenge. The bond hummed beneath the surface of the world like a low, waiting note. She stopped an arm's length away. The air between them carried weight now, dense with meaning, as though every unspoken promise pressed into the space and gave it mass. "If I touch you," she said evenly, "something will change." "Yes," he said. "You do not get to ask for that." "No." "You do not get to assume it." "No." "And if I never do?" "Then I will still stand where you left me," he replied, voice steady and unhurried. "Not as your king, as the man who finally learned how to wait." The wolf within her settled deeper, pleased by the shape of that truth. Kate stepped back instead of forward. Maddox held his ground without the smallest flinch, his restraint carved from will rather than fear, and that stillness spoke louder than any vow he could have offered. She turned her face toward the moon and let its light wash fully over her skin, letting her wolf stretch and orient to the open night, to the wind, to the living map of the world waiting to be run. Then she released herself. The shift unfolded like a secret finally spoken aloud, heat flowing outward as bone and muscle realigned with fluid inevitability, sensation intensifying into vivid clarity without pain or fracture. Breath deepened into wild air, scent opened into layered meaning, and distance collapsed into reachable immediacy. She stood revealed. Where Kate had been, a great silver-white wolf rose beneath the moon, her fur catching light like frost edged in fire, her powerful form unmistakably feminine and utterly sovereign. Glacier blue eyes opened with brilliant intelligence and fixed upon Maddox with calm, unblinking awareness. He sank to one knee. Reverence moved him there, ancient instinct recognizing authority embodied rather than declared. The wolf held his gaze in silent acknowledgement. Then she turned and ran. Joy surged through every stride as she tore across the meadow, muscles singing beneath moonlit fur, earth meeting her paws with delighted acceptance. She leapt stone and shadow in effortless arcs, cut through tall grass that whispered along her flanks, and felt the world answer her presence with open space rather than resistance. She ran because she could. She returned because she chose. When she padded back into the meadow, her breath came steady and sure, moonlight tracing the elegant line of her shoulders and the knowing intelligence in her eyes. She stopped several feet from Maddox, her immense presence filling the space between them with quiet authority. The shift reversed with the same fluid grace. Fur receded into skin, bones reshaped into human lines, and Kate stood once more beneath the moon, naked and radiant and utterly unashamed, her body humming with the echo of power freshly claimed. Maddox did not look away. He did not rise. He remained kneeling, breathing like a man who had just watched the axis of his world settle into true alignment. Kate stepped forward until she stood directly before him, the wolf within her calm and watchful and approving. "If I touch you," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of irrevocable choice, "there is no undoing what follows." Maddox lifted his gaze to her face, green eyes bright with reverence and restraint. "I know. You do not get to ignore me again. I won't. You will show me every day how much I matter." His breath shuddered. "Every day." The wolf approved. Kate reached out and laid her fingers along the line of his jaw. The instant her skin met his, the bond ignited in a blinding surge of recognition and belonging, and the world dissolved into white gold light. Chapter 23. Staying. The summons arrived just after dawn, slipping into the quiet morning like a single pebble cast into still water, its presence small yet certain, its meaning rippling outward through years of habit and expectation. It came folded and sealed, carried by a runner who paused at the threshold with respectful patience, boots planted just beyond the doorway as though the weight of the message itself forbade him from crossing into the warmth within. Pale gold light spilled across the wooden floor from the tall window beside the table, catching in drifting motes of dust and illuminating the thin ribbon of steam rising from two untouched cups of tea. Kate noticed the summons at once. The hour carried memory in its bones. This was the familiar edge of morning where duty once claimed Maddox with unrelenting hands, the moment when counsel stirred, messengers hurried, and obligations rose like walls between them. For so long this had been the quiet hinge upon which their days separated, the precise breath where presence turned to absence. Maddox broke the seal and read the message only once. Then he folded the paper with calm deliberation and set it aside. He remained seated. He did not rise from his chair. He did not summon an answer. He did not turn his body toward the door. Instead, he lifted his cup and took a slow sip of tea, the porcelain warm against his fingers, the morning light tracing the line of his jaw as though time itself had chosen to rest where he did. Kate said nothing. The silence that followed stretched long and unbroken, and within it the world continued in gentle motion. Leaves stirred outside the window. A distant bird called across the grounds. The runner shifted his weight just beyond the threshold, the faint scrape of boot leather carrying softly through the air as he waited for a command that never came. Across the table, Maddox turned his full attention back to her. He asked about the road ahead, about the places she wished to see and the path she wanted to follow, about how long she intended to stay once she reached her chosen destination. His questions flowed easily, shaped by genuine curiosity rather than interruption, and his posture held steady openness, shoulders relaxed, gaze warm and wholly present. His focus never drifted toward the door. Something in Kate's chest softened and loosened, a tightness she had long mistaken for permanence dissolving into breath. In another life, in another morning shaped by older patterns, she would have prepared herself for the inevitable shift, for the chair scraping back, for footsteps retreating into echoing halls while she folded her hands around cooling tea. Instead, time moved forward without fracture. The walls held. The sky did not darken. The world remained whole because he chose to stay seated. Her wolf observed with quiet approval, steady and watchful beneath her ribs. At last, Kate spoke, her voice calm and certain in the hush. "They will keep waiting." Maddox inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the truth without yielding to it. "They can." "You are choosing this," she said, meeting his eyes. "Yes." The answer stood complete in its simplicity. No explanation rose to defend it, no justification pressed against it. His choice existed as fact rather than argument, presence offered freely rather than wrested from obligation. Outside the door, the runner's patience thinned into understanding. Soft footsteps retreated down the corridor, the summons carried away unanswered. Maddox did not follow the sound with his eyes. He reached for the teapot instead and poured her another cup without asking, the amber stream catching the morning light as it filled the porcelain. He slid the cup toward her with easy familiarity, setting it within reach of her hand in the exact place she always chose for herself. Kate curled her fingers around the warmth and lifted it to her lips. The gesture settled into her like sunlight. Later, they walked the grounds together beneath a sky washed pale blue with early day, the gravel path crunching softly beneath their measured steps, while dew clung to the edges of leaves and grass. Wolves moved through the estate at a respectful distance, their gazes flickering toward them with quiet awareness, sensing the shift in the air the way living things sense an approaching storm and welcome the rain it promises. No one stepped forward. No voice rose to interrupt. Maddox's stride matched hers without hesitation, his presence aligned to her pace and direction, each step a silent affirmation that nothing beyond her demanded his attention more. When they reached the far edge of the terrace where the land fell away into open meadow, Maddox slowed and turned to face her, the morning light catching in his green eyes and clearing them of every shadow that once lingered there. He left the space between them open and untouched, hands resting easily at his sides, every line of his posture shaped by invitation rather than claim. "I want to ask you something," he said. Kate waited, the wind lifting a strand of her hair and carrying it lightly across her cheek. "I want to renew our vows," he continued, voice steady and unhurried. "Not as correction, not as performance, as choice." The bond between them stirred gently, a low, resonant hum that listened as intently as she did. "I want to stand with you openly," he said, each word clear and deliberate. "I want the life ahead of us to begin in presence rather than recovery. I want to do it when you are ready, in whatever way feels right to you." He paused, letting the silence breathe. "And if you say no," he added softly, "I will still stay." The offer settled between them like a stone placed carefully upon solid ground, carrying weight without burden, shaped entirely by willingness rather than need. Kate studied him in the clear morning light. She saw no urgency flicker in his gaze, no grasping fear of losing the moment before it could be secured. He stood as a man already anchored in the truth of who he had chosen to become, a future shaped by constancy rather than ceremony. Her wolf leaned forward inside her, drawn to that quiet certainty. Kate stepped closer, closing the open space until his warmth brushed her skin and his breath mingled softly with hers. She felt the steadiness of him, the unwavering alignment of his attention, the profound simplicity of a man who chose to remain. "Yes," she said. The word flowed easily from her lips and settled into the morning air like a promise spoken to the land itself. Maddox drew a slow, measured breath, and the tension that once shadowed every still moment simply dissolved, leaving only calm and clarity in its wake. He did not reach to claim the answer. He did not move to seize the moment. He stood with her. Together they turned toward the path ahead, sunlight spilling across the stones at their feet, the day opening wide before them like a road newly cleared. This time, their steps fell side by side, presence meeting presence, and the future welcomed them both.